Bedtime Reading. Lady Chatterley's Lover. Chapter 1. Terrible things have happened to our world, and as we try to rebuild it and bring hope back into our lives, there will be many things to prevent our progress. Yet, we must do our best to get around them and continue living. This was Constance Chatterley's view of the world. She had suffered greatly because of the war, and now her life would never be the same. In the year 1917, she married Clifford Chatterley, an English soldier, while he was home for a month's rest from the war. She was 23 and he 29. After their honeymoon, he rejoined the war, only to be horribly injured. Clifford managed to stay alive, but he would never walk again. When finally released from the doctor's care in 1920, he and his wife, Constance, returned to Ragby Hall, Clifford's childhood home. His father had died just before his release from hospital, so Clifford replaced him as master of the house. He then became known as Sir Clifford, and his wife, Constance, Lady Chatterley. Having little money and no family nearby, married life began a little difficultly for the couple. They were alone in a large, sad home. Clifford, no longer having the ability to have children returned to his homeland with only one idea: to keep his family's name alive by living as long as he could. Yet, Clifford did not seem very sad. It appeared that he had lost, along with his ability to walk, his ability to suffer. He always looked to be in a very good mood. But sometimes there could be seen, behind his bright blue eyes, a strange and empty look that told of hidden feelings. It was as if something inside of him had died. His wife, Constance, had the look of a woman from the countryside. However, her family was quite wealthy, and she had received an unusually excellent education. She and her sister, Hilda, had been to all of the intellectual and artistic capitals of Europe, where they learned, through direct experience, about art, philosophy, and politics. When they turned 15, they were sent to music school in Germany. They enjoyed their time there, playing with the boys and challenging them to political discussions. The sisters felt completely free and happy. They, of course, fell in and out of love, but love for them was nothing compared to the conversations they had with the boys. By the age of 18, both Hilda and Constance had each had several boyfriends. The boys they played and talked with all wanted love and sex from the girls. The two sisters did not want the same thing as the boys, but they eventually decided that they might go ahead and make an offer to the best of the group. As they had expected, the sex was disappointing. The girls found themselves feeling less love for the young men afterwards. In some cases, they even felt hatred for the boys, for at times it seemed like they had tried to take away from the girls what was most important to them, their freedom. And more than anything in the world, a girl's greatest purpose in life is to find and keep as much freedom as possible. Women have always known that sex was least important in a relationship. Unfortunately, men have always demanded sex, like animals. What was even worse was that women had to give the men what they wanted, because if they did not, just like a child, the men would somehow find a way to destroy the relationship. However, giving a man her body did not mean that the woman also had to give up her freedom. In reality, by allowing the men to achieve their pleasure, women could do with these men whatever they pleased. So, by the time the war arrived, both Hilda and Constance had experienced love several times each. They, however, never fell in love with someone unless they could have a good conversation with them. And sex could never happen without first having a highly intelligent talk. Eventually, the sisters each found themselves a love. Hilda's was a young engineer, and Constance's was a musician. During sex, the sisters would come close to feeling they could give up everything for the boys, but then they would remember that it was only a moment's pleasure and nothing to lose their freedom over. Then the war arrived, and the two girls were quickly sent back to England to attend their mother's funeral. Within the first year of the war, both Hilda's engineer and Constance's musician were killed. They cried heavily, but inside they had really already forgotten them. The girls then lived with their father and began to make friends with many students from Cambridge University who were young, intelligent, and against everything. Soon, Hilda got married to an older man who still associated with the Cambridge Fellows, but now worked for the government. They lived comfortably in Westminster and enjoyed close friendships with the best members of the English government. Constance, on the other hand, met a young Cambridge man named Clifford Chatterley, who at the time was only 22. His family was much wealthier than Connie's. He had just returned to England after having studied a short while in Germany to become an officer in the army. Connie's intelligence and ease strongly impressed Clifford. She had real ideas about the world, while he just followed all of the other young men in their hatred of everything popular. He thought that everything around him was stupid: his father, the government, the army, and the war. He laughed at his father when he cut down his forest to supply the military with wood. He had a big laugh over this with his older brother, Herbert, and his sister, Emma. However, as he laughed, he started to see how stupid he himself was. Then he thought of Connie and how people like her were separated from the stupidest of society because they had true intelligence and a healthy, worldly view of things. Then, in 1916, Clifford's brother was killed in the war, which made Clifford next in line to replace his father. Sir Geoffrey, whenever he died, as the master of Ragby Hall. The idea of this both pleased and frightened him. He and his father were such different people. Sir Geoffrey was a man of England, while Clifford wanted to be, like Connie, a man of the world. It seemed impossible, and yet it was going to one day happen. Sir Geoffrey demanded that Clifford marry and have a son who could carry the Chatterley name into the future. Clifford did not take any of that very seriously. But then the war made Clifford begin to feel the need for something safe and comfortable. He felt that the time had come to marry. So he married Constance Reed in that horrible year of 1917. At the time, he had never had sex before. However, their love for each other was so strong that the sex seemed unimportant, even to Clifford, who proved to be very different from most men. For him, sex was just a small part of the relationship that he could easily do with or without. Connie soon had a little more motivation for sex because she decided that she would like to have a child. But as we know, in 1918, Clifford's body was badly damaged, and no child could ever come after that. And then, Sir Geoffrey soon died from sadness. Chapter 2. In the autumn of 1920, the Chatterleys arrived at Ragby Hall. Their house, once a fine home, was now a bit sad and unimpressive due to the many attempts by its owners to make it larger. It was located in a beautiful park full of tall oak trees. However, this beauty suffered from the presence of a nearby coal mine and the view of the ugly village of Tevershall, which lay down below, at the bottom of the hill. Constance, being used to the comfort and beauty of her family's Kensington home, was quite surprised by the ugliness of this part of England, but told herself not to think much about it, for it would only upset both her and Clifford. She hoped that the inside of the house might help her to forget what she had seen outside. However, this was not so, because she could hear the sounds of labor coming from the mine, trains, trucks, and hammers. Constance could smell the mine as well. She learned from Clifford that it had been on fire for years, and that, because it was so difficult to put out, it would probably continue to burn for a few years more. On days when the wind was blowing from the mine towards Ragby Hall, the whole house would smell of coal and dirt. On their first day in Ragby, as they were driven home from the train station, Connie noticed that the people of the town did not seem friendly toward Clifford. They would not raise their hands to say hello, and no smile ever appeared on any of the passing faces. They simply stared as they drove by. Obviously, she and her husband would not have many friends in this town. Of course, there were times when she had to talk with the wives of the miners. When she did, they always seemed false toward her. In the end, Connie decided to do as Clifford did, ignore them. So, she let them stare and make their terrible comments to one another about her. When Clifford had to do business with these people, he often showed them very little respect. He looked down on them all, and they knew it. But he was neither hated nor liked by the people. He was just another part of Ragby that everyone simply accepted. Now that he could no longer walk, Clifford was not quite as arrogant as before. He was a little embarrassed about his condition and made sure not to see anybody but Connie and his house servants. Seeing him so easily hurt, so delicate, Connie could not help but love him more and more. Clifford's view of the miners was troubling to Connie, however. He did not think of them as men, but rather as tools for removing riches from the ground. He saw them as animals and almost feared them. But this feeling applied to almost everyone else as well. The only thing that made Connie seem more special than others was the care that she provided for him. He had now been made a helpless child. He needed assistance with nearly everything: bathing, eating, and taking walks in the park. She felt needed by him. As helpless as he was, he still had the desire to do something with himself, so he began to write stories. He wrote about various people that he knew or had known, and often wrote about them in cold, negative ways. He wrote well, but he also wrote angrily. And because nowadays this kind of writing is very popular, several of his stories were published in magazines. Connie liked it when Clifford would talk with her about his stories. They had become his life, and so he would go on and on for hours about them. He often wanted her opinion about his ideas, and this caused her to have to put a lot of effort and energy into the stories, almost as much as his own. She enjoyed that feeling, even though it made her quite tired. Connie's father would occasionally pay very brief visits to the house as well. During one of these visits, he pulled his daughter aside and said to her that although Clifford's writing was very intelligent and entertaining, his stories were quite empty. This bothered Connie, for Clifford's stories were becoming more and more popular. She wondered how her father could think such a thing. On another visit, her father said something even more surprising.
"You won't let this situation prevent you from enjoying sex with other men, will you?"
Connie did not know what to say to this. Later, her father mentioned the same thing to Clifford in private.
"Is that necessary?"
Clifford asked.
"She's beginning to look like an old woman already. Women need sex to keep them young, my boy."
As surprised and hurt as he was by these words, Clifford began to think more and more about Connie's situation. But he feared to speak with her about it. He felt that it was too early in their relationship. Connie guessed that her father had said something to Clifford, and that he had been thinking about it ever since. But she also knew that Clifford would not care how she lived her life as long as she kept that part of it secret and never gave him any reason to worry or feel jealous. Clifford, though he did not see them often, had many friends, or at least people that he knew, whom he would occasionally invite over to his home. Most of them were writers, publishers, or critics. He hoped that by inviting them, they would say good things about his stories. And they did. He also had his wealthy friends who also came by. Connie hosted all of these gatherings, and because of her beauty, many of the guests enjoyed her company. She pretended not to notice a lot of the stares and smiles that were directed at her. She usually just remained quiet and brought the men whatever they needed. For 2 years, they lived this life, a life spent talking about Clifford's stories and taking afternoon walks in the park. It all seemed like a dream or a story that she had heard before. Chapter 3. However, a desire soon began to grow inside of Connie. All that she had was her husband and his stories, which she had been told were empty. It made her feel so terribly uncomfortable that she would have to separate herself from Clifford by running off into the park. She thought that the park might help her to feel like her old self again. However, it did not, because it was all still a part of this place, Ragby, a place where she felt she did not belong. At times, she thought she might be going crazy. What could she do? How could she continue with this kind of life? Then, a gentleman named Michaelis appeared. He was a famous playwright from Ireland. For a while, he had been welcomed into the homes of many of London's richest people to take part in their dinners and parties. But once the English realized that Michaelis's plays made a joke of them, and that he actually hated the English, they immediately refused to invite him to their gatherings, and spoke terribly of him as often as possible. Clifford did not like Michaelis very much either. However, he still welcomed him into his home, for he thought that by being kind to this famous man, his own stories might gain popularity, especially in such faraway places as America, where Michaelis had done very well. Connie liked something about the writer. She felt that he was very honest about himself and did not try to hide anything from people. He told Clifford and Connie that he thought himself lucky, for he never wrote plays that he thought people would like. He only wrote about his own ideas.
Well, most people of your age do not have the ability to do what you've done,
said Clifford, meaning to be a little cruel.
30 years,
said Michaelis.
Yes, I am a bit old now, aren't I? I suppose that I should soon start thinking about marriage.
You don't sound happy about it, commented Connie.
Well, you see, I'm sorry to say this, but I don't think I could possibly marry an Englishwoman, or even an Irishwoman. I'm afraid that I would need someone from a strange and foreign land, somewhere like Turkey, maybe.
To Connie, Michaelis was a true outsider, struggling against society. He did not want fame, but simply accepted the fame that came to him through the work he naturally did. Clifford seemed ridiculous in comparison, even idiotic. The next day, after breakfast, Michaelis decided to ask if Lady Chatterley would like to take a drive to a nearby city. Much to his surprise, the servant he had sent to her returned, saying that Lady Chatterley would prefer for Michaelis to visit her on the 3rd floor. He followed the servant upstairs. When he arrived, he looked around and noticed how different this room was from the rest of the house. Its decorations were much more modern, and it had a warmer, more colorful feeling to it.
Your room is quite nice, my lady,
said Michaelis. Thank you. I like it up here, answered Connie. They then sat down, facing each other in separate chairs, and began to talk about their families and their lives. After a while, the conversation turned back to Michaelis's success. Why are you so lonely? Connie asked.
It's my nature, I suppose. What about you? You seem to be quite lonely yourself.
This surprised Connie and made her feel that they shared something in common. His eyes met her, and they seemed to understand something about one another. Connie felt her heart pounding inside her chest, and her breath trembled so much that she hoped he would speak again so that he might not notice.
May I come over to you and put my hand in yours?
He asked. Before Connie could answer, he got up from his chair, got on his knees before her, and placed his head on her legs. She was both confused and excited. She gently touched the back of his neck. Michaelis let out a deep breath and looked up at her. At that moment, Connie knew that she would not be able to stop. She gave herself to him. He made love to her gently, and his body shook with desire. But, at the same time, he also seemed to be paying attention to the things around them, the objects and the sounds. He was giving himself to her, but not all of himself. And it was the same for Connie. After a few minutes of holding each other and relaxing from their lovemaking, Michaelis got up from the bed, kissing her hands and feet. He stood silently at the other end of the room, seeming to think about something. Then he turned around toward Connie.
You hate me now, don't you?
He asked. Of course not. Why would I? Replied Connie.
They usually do. I mean, you know, that's what you're supposed to feel, right?
Hardly, she said a little angrily. Then a worried look came over her. "But please, don't tell anyone. It would make Clifford feel awful if he knew. I don't think what we've done is bad, do you?"
Bad? No, of course not. Oh, you're so kind.
He turned his head away, and Connie knew that he was going to start crying at any moment. "So, it's agreed that we won't let Clifford know?"
Never. I'll never give any part of myself to him.
Michaelis suddenly whispered angrily. Then, getting control over himself again, he said almost childishly,
I just need to know that you're not angry with me.
"No, not at all. You're sweet."
Thank you. I think that I will take a drive to Sheffield and do some thinking. I will join you for afternoon tea if you don't mind.
And then he left.
I tell you, I don't like that Michaelis at all,
said Clifford later, over lunch. "Why? Don't you think that people have been treating him rather cruelly?" asked Connie.
He deserves it,
replied Clifford. "But I think he's brave."
Dear, I think you're confusing bravery with irresponsibility.
Connie thought about this for a moment. Even if it were irresponsibility, Michaelis was doing things in the world. He was making things happen for himself, while Clifford was simply trying to become famous. Connie realized that she was in love with Michaelis, but she knew that their lovemaking would not change his situation in any way. Yet, he appreciated the kindness Connie had shown him so much that he had almost cried. And deep inside of him, behind his calm appearance, he wanted her again. That evening, they agreed to meet again, only this time in his room. When they made love again, he reached his climax very quickly, and afterward placed his head on Connie's breast, while she lay there silent and a little angry that he had finished so quickly. But then she would keep him inside of her, and somehow his penis would remain hard, which allowed her to eventually reach her orgasm. It made Michaelis feel good that he could still give her pleasure after he had already had his. When he left on the third day, he was still the same man as on the first. He was the kind of person who could not keep a relationship with anyone. Although she did not completely understand him, Connie felt that she loved him. But she knew that she could never love him in the way that she wanted to love him, because he needed to be alone. For a while afterward, they wrote each other letters and occasionally met in London, where they would make love in the same way as before, with his quick orgasm and her holding him inside of her until she, herself, finished. Connie felt happy again, and it gave her extra energy to work with Clifford on his short stories. So, in a way, everyone was made happy by these little meetings between Connie and Michaelis. Clifford, of course, never knew about them. After a while, when the meetings began to occur less and less often, Connie started to lose her energy, and she once again became quiet and sad. Clifford could feel this, and he wished that she could somehow become happier and more excited again. His writing was suffering for it now. It is possible that if he had known about his wife and Michaelis, he might have wanted them to continue their meetings. Chapter 4. On a cold February morning, Connie and Clifford went out for a stroll through the park. The air was as dirty as always, but they had grown accustomed to it. They headed toward the old forest, which was once the home of Robin Hood, the famous outlaw who helped the poor by stealing from the rich. Back in those days, the forest was huge, but now, of course, it could easily be crossed within a few hours. Clifford loved the trees, and he wanted to protect them somehow.
This is England, right here. Old England. I refuse to let anyone else destroy it. I'm having trees planted all over this area, you know.
Yes, I know, answered Connie, while at the same time a factory horn sounded in the distance.
It's at moments like these that I really wish I could have a son.
He went on.
If it weren't for my family, all of these trees would already be gone. Someone has got to remember and protect old England. If we forget where we come from, there will be no England in the future. I feel that I must do this. I feel it's my duty. And when I die, there needs to be someone who can replace me and keep tradition alive in England, even if only a small part of it.
Connie did not know what to say. It bothered her to hear Clifford speak of wanting a son only for the purpose of preserving English tradition. It sounded so cold.
What if you were to have a child with another man? I mean, we would keep the child, of course, and I would be its father. It could live here with us and grow up to one day replace me. What do you think of the idea?
Connie was surprised and disgusted by Clifford's use of the word it to describe the child, as though it were some animal. And this other man? Asked Connie.
You'll forget him quickly. What matters is our relationship. We are husband and wife. The longer we are together, the closer we will become.
We are something that will last for years, until the day we die. Sex dies within moments.
But aren't you concerned about the type of man with whom I have your child? Asked Connie.
I trust that you would find a good man. After all, you care for me too much to choose the wrong man.
Connie thought about how she had chosen Michaelis as a lover, and how she knew that Clifford would never have approved of him. Will you ask me to tell you who the father is? Asked Connie.
No, I'd rather not know, to be honest. As long as you agree with me that sex means nothing, I will trust you to find someone suitable. I think we are just doing what we have to, Connie. In order for us to feel complete and happy, we will need a child. People need to realize their needs and satisfy them, or else they can't live good lives. If a person isn't having enough sex, they should go and find a lover to have sex with. If a husband and wife don't love each other, they need to find something they can both love together, like a child.
Connie was a little frightened by Clifford's words. This was a big step she would be taking. A child. And all this talk of being together forever, it meant being at Ragby forever. Maybe you're right, she heard herself say.
So, we agree then.
Okay, yes, we agree. But then a dog appeared from behind a tree. It was a hunting dog, and suddenly, behind the dog, came a man riding upon a horse. He held a gun in his hands, and when he saw the two standing there, he stopped his horse. At first, Connie was frightened by him. He looked like a soldier, about to raise his gun and fire at them. But then he simply raised his hand and saluted them.
Mellors, could you help me for a moment?
Clifford called to him. The man got off the horse and approached Clifford's chair.
I just need to be turned around so that I can start back up this hill. I was wondering if you could ride along with us, for the engine on this thing is very weak, and I fear it may stop on our way up.
Then, looking at Connie,
Oh, I'm sorry, Mellors. Have you met my wife? No, sir, I have not. Well, Constance, this is our gamekeeper, Mellors. How do you do, your ladyship?
How do you do? Replied Connie a little shyly. She felt that he must have been a soldier. His movements were all very quick and purposeful. She found his coldness very strange and too extreme, but, at the same time, she felt that deep inside of him there was warmth. So how do you like working at Ragby? Mellors paused for a moment and then said,
I like it very much, your ladyship.
He said this with a bit of his countryside accent. He sounded as though he was from this area. But when he spoke with Clifford, there was no accent to be heard.
Well, let's get moving, shall we?
Clifford suggested. They moved back along the path toward the house, and, as they approached the gate to the park, Connie suddenly ran forward and opened it for the two men. After they had passed the entrance, she then ran to catch up with them. The sky was an ugly gray now. It looked like it might snow at any moment. The world seemed so terribly tired and sad. And Connie felt this inside herself. She needed something else in her life. Clifford, of course, did not realize this, for he did not pay that kind of attention to people. However, other people could tell. Mellors could probably see it in her eyes, if he would only look at her. Around the back of the home, they arrived at the entrance. But there being no steps, it was necessary for Clifford to raise himself up from the chair with his arms, and for Connie to lift his dead legs in order to transfer him to the house wheelchair. Seeing this, Mellors grew very frightened. He could not imagine Connie being able to support Sir Clifford's weight, but she managed.
Anything else, Sir Clifford? No, that'll be all, Mellors.
I hope it wasn't too much trouble for you, added Connie. Her words surprised the gamekeeper. He turned around to her and said, in his local accent,
No trouble at all, your ladyship.
Later at lunch, Connie asked Clifford to tell her more about Mellors.
He's a local man who used to work at the mines as a blacksmith, I believe. 2 years before the war, he started working here as the gamekeeper for my father. Then he joined the army. When I'd heard that he had returned from the war and was back at the mines, I invited him to act as our gamekeeper again.
Does he have a wife? Asked Connie.
No, she left him for another man. In fact, I think it was another worker at the mine. They live in town.
Then Clifford thought for a moment.
Oh, yes, and I think that he has a child, but I'm not really quite sure.
Connie felt a little sorry for the gamekeeper. He seemed lonely. And it troubled her to hear Clifford talk about him in such a distant and uncaring way. She felt that the whole world was becoming colder. The idea of living so many more years in this world caused her to feel a little afraid. Everything about her life seemed more and more empty. Her relationship with Clifford, her life at Ragby, and yes, Clifford's stories. True, he was nearly famous now. His picture could be seen in various places in London, including a couple of museums. He was considered one of the most modern writers in the country. Connie, however, started to feel that his stories really had very little to say at all. At this time, Michaelis had begun work on a play that included a character similar to Clifford in it. He wrote to Clifford about it, and the idea of having someone acting as himself in a play excited him greatly. Clifford invited Michaelis to his home, and the Irishman soon came with the first part of the play, completed. He read it to Clifford and Connie, and they both loved it. But later that night, he was disappointed to find that Connie did not visit his bedroom. The next day, when he went to her room, he asked her opinion of the play. She praised it highly, and this made Michaelis feel wonderful, although Connie knew deep down that the play was really nothing.
So, why don't we get married, you and I?
He suggested suddenly. But I have a husband, Connie replied.
Oh, he cares only for himself. Why stay with someone who can't show you a good time?
And what do you mean by that? She asked.
I mean, wonderful clothing, parties, and travel to distant countries, all that.
The whole time he said all of this, Connie had no feeling. She only thought about how selfish men really are to expect women to follow them around like stupid little puppies by holding money and diamonds before their eyes. Well, I'll think about it, she finally answered. Clifford is disabled, you know.
Disabled? Think about my disability. I'm lonely,
cried the Irishman. Later that night, Connie went to Michaelis's room, as he had asked her to. He seemed to put more energy into his lovemaking that night. But he still seemed weak and gentle, like a young boy to Connie. And because he reached his climax very quickly, she had to continue long after his to reach her own. He managed to stay hard for her, and she remained active on top of him until she finally felt the pleasure she had been seeking. Afterward, as they lay there, still and quiet, Michaelis suddenly burst out with the angry words,
Why can't you ever have your orgasm at the same time as mine? You always have to keep riding on top of me, and I have to lie there uncomfortably.
Connie was very surprised and disappointed by these words. Was sex just a quick 3-minute adventure to him? Could he really be that selfish? Don't you want me to feel good? She asked.
Yes, of course. But is it always necessary for me to have to sit through hours of you riding about up there? All women are this way. Either they can't have their orgasm at all, or it takes them hours to get there.
And suddenly, all of Connie's sexual desire for Michaelis, and for all men in general, disappeared. She had been close to agreeing to marry him that night. Very close. It is possible that he knew that and said this on purpose to ruin everything. After that, Connie felt horribly sad and alone in the world. She had only this life with Clifford, this long life of habit and boredom. Chapter 5. It seemed to Connie that men and women no longer wanted one another. The best a woman could do was to trick herself into believing that a man wanted her, which is what had happened to Connie with Michaelis. She could see now why people had their parties and dances. It was all a way to get that inner feeling of frustration out. In some ways, she wished that she had run off with Michaelis to live out the rest of her life in one big party. Michaelis would not have had to love her then. It would be sad, but less sad than her present life, she thought. So there's love, marriage, my husband, and Michaelis, and I guess that's it. She imagined herself on her last day of life, looking back over the years and saying the same thing to herself just before dying. I guess that's it. She would often cry bitter tears over this, but then she would stop herself and say, "I don't need anything more than I have. I will just continue to be with Clifford, help him to write his books, and do what I always do. Who needs sex?" But then there was the issue of a baby. This was something she could not put out of her head so easily. At the same time, she could not imagine anyone with whom she might have a child. None of the men she knew were good enough. For this reason, she began to think that it would probably have to be a man from a faraway place, totally different from those in England. It had rained, and the ground was too soft for Clifford to go out in his chair, but he needed a message to be sent to the gamekeeper. So he asked Connie if she would mind taking it to him. She did not mind, for she had planned to go for a walk on her own anyway. When she arrived at the gamekeeper's house, she heard a sound coming from around the backyard, so she followed the noise. Coming around the corner, she saw the gamekeeper washing himself at his back door. He had no shirt on, and his pants were hanging loosely from his waist, looking just about ready to fall at any moment. He was pouring water over his head and washing out the soap from his hair. She was enjoying with her eyes the whiteness of the skin around his lower waist, when suddenly she turned and ran back toward the forest. She felt both excited and disgusted. Something about seeing the man both attracted her and made her want to run away. She stopped and remembered that she had Clifford's message to deliver. She had to go back. Walking slowly toward the house again, she felt embarrassed about having seen him and made sure to give him enough time to finish his bath and dress. Once she arrived, she nervously knocked at his door. Moments later, he opened the door.
"Lady Chatterley, good afternoon,"
he said with an easy smile.
"Please come in."
"I have just come with a message from Sir Clifford." And she proceeded to tell him her husband's wishes. While speaking, she noticed a kindness in his eyes.
"Fine. I will take care of it immediately,"
he answered. "Do you live here all alone?" she then asked.
"Yes, ma'am, all alone."
"And what about your mother?"
"She has her own home."
"And I suppose your daughter lives with her?" At this, the gamekeeper's eyes showed both surprise and anger.
"Yes, your ladyship, they live together."
"Well, I hope that I didn't bother you," Connie said, turning to go. He then walked her down to the gate and opened it for her. Walking behind him, Connie felt that he did not seem like the type of person to be a gamekeeper or worker. Later that day, Connie mentioned the gamekeeper to Clifford. "He's an interesting man, isn't he? Sometimes he seems almost like a gentleman, wouldn't you say?"
"I didn't really notice, actually,"
Clifford replied.
"People often learn proper manners while working for officers in the army. Then, of course, as soon as they return home, they lose it all and go back to being rough and uneducated."
"But don't you think something is different about him?" Connie persisted.
"No, not really."
Connie knew that this was Clifford's way of lying to himself. He was afraid of recognizing equality in other men. Everyone had to be lower than him, or he would feel uncomfortable. Connie wondered why the men of her age were all so scared of everything. Chapter 6. Upstairs in her bedroom, Connie took off all of her clothing and stood in front of the mirror. She became sad at the sight of her body. She felt that her body was losing all of its former character, losing its meaning. Here she was, only 27 years old, and looking more and more like an old woman. Her body had once been beautiful and graceful. Only one man enjoyed that beauty, her young German boyfriend, who had now been dead for 10 years. She missed the physical and pure love that they had shared. She feared that it could not be found among any other men at all, for most seemed only to care about their orgasm. She put on her nightgown and got into bed, where she cried hard, bitter tears. She felt anger toward Clifford and all men who were like him, men who were so selfish and let their women dry up and go to waste. It all seemed so wrong to her. She got up very early the next morning and, as usual, helped Clifford to get ready for the day. He refused help from anybody else, even from male servants. He believed that Connie's helping him made the two of them closer. Some things, of course, Connie could not do on her own, such as lifting Clifford from the bath and so on. These things the cleaning woman's husband would help her with. And, of course, as most people who are cared for daily, Clifford began not to take notice of all the things Connie did for him. She knew that this was normal, but it still hurt her a great deal. She felt unappreciated in every way. Connie tried not to blame Clifford, but in a way, she felt that he was too cold. There was absolutely no physical love between them, and in terms of their talk, it was mostly about his stories and seldom about their relationship. For people like Clifford, it was considered stupid to show much love toward someone. People like him, people with money and power, often chose to remain quiet about their feelings. Connie thought that this was sad. She desired male contact and proper loving attention. She wondered if there was any point in continuing to care for someone like that. Anyone could take care of Clifford. He did not need her so badly. As the days went on, Connie found that she had very little to look forward to. Every day was the same as the next. She felt terribly unhealthy and feared that death might be approaching. So, she decided to write to her sister Hilda for help. She sent the letter, and 1 week later, her sister drove down from Scotland to pay her a visit. When Hilda arrived, she could see right away that something was wrong with Connie. "What's going on here?" she asked. "Nothing. I'm okay," Connie replied, feeling a little embarrassed. Hilda, however, knew that her sister was not well. It was obvious. This made her very angry. So, she went directly to talk with Clifford. She found him sitting in his study. He looked well taken care of. His appearance was almost perfect. His eyes had a fighting look in them, but this did not stop Hilda from telling him just how she felt. "My sister is looking quite ill. Wouldn't you agree?" she said.
"Oh, I don't think it's serious. She's only lost a little weight,"
he answered. "Well, she needs to see a doctor."
"Do you really think that's necessary?" I certainly don't know of any good doctors in the area.
Then I'll take her to London and have her examined there. Clifford said nothing to this. He knew that underneath Hilda's polite manner, she was ready to argue with him. Later, during dinner, Hilda strongly suggested that Clifford get a nurse to care for him, instead of Connie. I think you'd do much better with a male nurse especially.
Really?
Clifford managed to say, even though he was ready to explode with anger. He hated nurses, especially male nurses. He found it all too embarrassing to be taken care of by strangers. Of course, you mean you haven't noticed how much my sister has changed? She cannot continue to care for you on her own. If she does, then my father and I will have no choice but to take her back to Scotland for a few months to regain her strength. The next day, Hilda drove Connie back to Kensington, where a doctor properly examined her.
You must get out of that house and enjoy yourself more,
he suggested.
Go abroad. Go to London. Go somewhere. If you continue the way you have been, I fear you'll lose yourself to sadness.
Michaelis heard that Connie was in town and immediately paid her a visit with flowers in his hands. He, once again, asked her to run away with him and marry. He almost begged her, but she refused again. She could not leave Clifford, for it would upset her too much. Hilda hated the idea of her sister returning to that terrible place, Ragby. She hated it so much that she almost wished Connie would go ahead and marry Michaelis, though she did not like him much either. When they returned to Ragby, Hilda informed Clifford of the doctor's orders and made several suggestions for nurses to replace Connie immediately. When Clifford began to argue that he did not want a nurse, Hilda simply reminded him that he would leave her family no choice but to take Connie away from him. Therefore, the next day, Clifford chose a woman named Mrs. Bolton, a woman from Tevershall, to act as his personal nurse. Mrs. Bolton was a 47-year-old woman who had lost her husband 22 years before in a mining accident. After that, she decided to go to nursing school. Once she learned everything there was to know, she became a nurse for the Tevershall Mining Company, where she had been working up until the present. Now, she was looking for something a little easier to do. She did not like upper-class people very much, but she somehow felt pity for Clifford, and maybe even more pity for Connie. At first, Mrs. Bolton was very quiet and allowed herself to be bossed around by Clifford, who immediately tried to take control of the situation. He even asked her to do things she was not expected to do, such as cleaning up after him and bringing drinks to the room for him. Soon, however, due to her years of experience, Mrs. Bolton gained control over Clifford, just as she had before with all of those stubborn miners. In fact, she found him to be no different from the workers, really. Clifford, although his new nurse did a rather good job, was still quite upset that Connie was no longer his caregiver. He said that this change somehow hurt their relationship. Connie welcomed the change, however. She now had more freedom to do as she liked. She did not have to sit and listen to Clifford talk for hours about nothing. He still desired their late-night discussions, but Connie would ask Mrs. Bolton to come and prepare Clifford for bed just at the time these discussions would have begun. This allowed Connie to retire to her bedroom, where she would spend time the way that she wanted to spend it, alone. Mrs. Bolton brought a welcome change to Ragby. Connie felt that her life could now change a little for the better, and she looked forward to enjoying her new independence. Chapter 7. Connie did not quite know what to do with all the freedom that she now had. She began to pass the time inside the house, reading a book by the fire, or trying to sew something. Mrs. Bolton, noticing this, started to encourage her to get out more often, to take a ride into town, or go for a walk in the woods. Connie took her advice and went for a stroll. Along the way, she found a little spring where she decided to sit a while and listen to the gentle sound of water moving over small stones. It was a dark little place, but at the same time so quiet and peaceful. When she got up to go, Connie heard the sound of hammering. She began to follow the sound and discovered a little path she had never seen before. Walking down the strange path, the sound led her to a little open area where a small hut sat. Near the hut, the gamekeeper was kneeling on the ground, hammering away at a piece of wood. His dog saw Connie first and started barking a friendly hello. The keeper then looked up and saw her standing there. He looked a little annoyed at the interruption. "Sorry, I just heard the hammering and became curious," said Connie a little nervously.
I'm just building a home for the young birds,
he answered. "Would you mind if I sat down? I'm a little tired," Connie asked, feeling weak from both the walk and her discomfort.
Of course. Just step inside the hut and I'll make you a fire so you can keep warm.
"Oh, that's okay. I don't need a fire." However, when the keeper noticed how cold her hands looked, he decided to build a fire anyway. Once it was burning well, he returned to his work outside. Connie could not see him, but she could tell by the way he hammered the boards that he was uncomfortable with her presence. It must have bothered him that he could not always be alone, that his job made it necessary to see people sometimes. The fire grew too warm, so she moved to the door, where she could watch the keeper work. He seemed lonely to her, and this made her feel a little better about her own situation. The gamekeeper then took a brief moment from his work and noticed Connie sitting in the doorway, thinking. It looked as if she were waiting for something. Seeing her there, the keeper started to feel something like desire deep inside himself. This feeling both angered and frightened him. He did not want to have to deal with people any longer, including this young, upper-class girl. "I like this place," Connie said. "Do you keep this hut locked usually?"
Normally I do, your ladyship.
"Is there an extra key I could use, in case I wanted to come out here and relax for a while?" The keeper looked a little annoyed at this.
Oh, I'm sorry, your ladyship. You'll have to ask Sir Clifford about that.
"Well, Couldn't I just get a copy of your key made? Connie persisted.
I don't know anybody who copies keys around here, your ladyship.
Now, Connie was annoyed, because the keeper was trying to avoid helping her. She could tell that he did not like her very much, especially now that she was trying to invade his living space, his privacy. She left him angrily, and he did nothing but return to his work. Later, at tea time, Connie asked Clifford if there was another key to the hut.
Possibly. Why?
He asked. I found it today, and I really like sitting there. That's okay, isn't it?
Did you see the gamekeeper, Mellors, when you were there?
Yes, I did. He was a little unfriendly when I mentioned getting a second key for the hut.
Really? What did he say to you?
Nothing really. He just wasn't very helpful.
Well, I'll ask one of the servants to look in my father's study. There's probably an extra key there. So Mellors was unfriendly toward you.
Oh, it was nothing. I just didn't understand why he didn't want me to have a key. It's not his home, after all.
Yes, he seems to think he's someone quite special, doesn't he? He was married to a woman he didn't like very much. He got away from her by joining the army and being sent to India. I guess after a couple of years or so, one of the high-level officers decided to make him a lieutenant. But after a while, he became ill and was forced to quit the army. He just returned to normal life this year. I guess that it must be hard for him to go back to being a common citizen of little importance. But I tell you, I won't accept any bad attitude toward you or me. It's not our fault that he's living the way he is.
But his language, the way he speaks is so poor. How could he have been a lieutenant in the army? Asked Connie.
Oh, he can speak perfectly correct English when he wants to.
Clifford then wanted some fresh air, so they went for a short walk together in the park. It's so nice to breathe clean air sometimes, Connie said. Usually, I have only the feeling that people are just destroying the air with their anger and unhappiness.
You don't think it's the air that makes people feel that way?
Argued Clifford. Not at all. People destroy their environment, not the other way around, Connie said, ending the argument. When she picked a few flowers and gave them to Clifford to hold, he smelled them and quoted a poem he had recently read.
You still undestroyed bride of quietness.
These words made Connie angry. She hated the way that Clifford was always separating himself from real life with all of his words. Nature doesn't destroy itself. Man destroys nature, she said.
But what about the little insects that eat the plants and so on?
That's not destruction. That's eating. It's a natural part of things. They could both feel that something was coming between them, but neither person said anything about it. Connie was clearly trying to move away from Clifford. She was attacking his every word. She was so tired of his words and so tired of his selfishness. It then rained for the next couple of days. By the third day, Connie could not wait any longer. She walked back to the hut through the rain and sat on the front area, sheltered from the wetness outside. She still had no key. This little place seemed so perfect, so peaceful. Then a dog suddenly appeared, along with the gamekeeper. He seemed to stop for just a moment when he noticed her sitting at the hut.
So Clifford has no other key?
He asked. No, but I only wanted to sit here for a moment to get out of the rain. Connie was bothered by the way this man talked with her so casually and with the accent of the village people. She hated such disrespect.
Well, I'll just give you my key then. I can find another place to care for the birds,
he said, pulling the key from his pocket. But why would you do that?
I'm sure that my working around here would disturb your peace and calm.
Your working doesn't bother me.
But this time of year, I'll be around here often. I don't think you'll like the place as much with me being around.
Why are you arguing with me?
I don't mean to argue with you. This is yours and Sir Clifford's hut. I just don't want to bother you. I'll get you that key tomorrow then.
Forget it. I don't want it any more, Connie said angrily.
I'll have one made anyway. I know you like it here.
Connie then left. As she walked back toward the house, she thought about the keeper's strange behavior. She could not tell if he was serious or being rude to her. Why should she care if he were there or not? Was he so damned important? She was not sure how she felt about him. Chapter 8. Connie began to feel more and more helpless. She did not like Clifford any more. She knew it. Those feelings she had once had for him, the feeling that he had power over her, her physical attraction to him, they were all gone now. And there was no one in the world who could help her. Everyone was much too deeply involved in the craziness of society to care about anything more than money and love. All of society was crazy in this way, especially when it came to money. Mrs. Bolton was replacing Connie more and more as Clifford's caregiver and companion. She began to practice typing every day so that she could help Sir Clifford with his stories. She also replaced Connie in the evening games that Clifford liked to play, usually card games and chess. Mrs. Bolton was unfamiliar with many of the games, but Clifford gladly taught her the rules, for it made him feel intelligent and powerful. She loved being taught them, for she felt that she was learning more and more about upper-class people. They began to enjoy one another's company more and more. Mrs. Bolton loved being with a man who wrote published books and was well known in society, and it is understandable that Clifford should have enjoyed all the attention Mrs. Bolton showed him. He certainly never got that kind of attention from Connie. Eventually, they became so comfortable with one another that Mrs. Bolton began to tell him stories about the people of Tevershall village. She had all kinds of information to share about her many friends and acquaintances there, for she knew many people, and gossip was always going around town among the older women. Clifford enjoyed listening to her stories because it gave him ideas for his books. Connie then realized that his talent was nothing more than retelling other people's stories. She found nothing great in that at all. Listening to the nurses' stories made Connie feel a little ashamed. As interesting as they were, Mrs. Bolton told them with great excitement, but without any sympathy or feelings of pity for the people involved. This upset Connie, for she realized that Clifford's books were written in the same way, cold and distant, with no feeling for the characters, who were nothing more than tools towards success for him. At the same time, however, Mrs. Bolton's stories certainly brought life to the horribly dead-looking village of Tevershall. Hearing some of them, Connie was surprised to find how similar the poor people were to the rich. Both wanted money. The only difference between them was that some had it and even more did not. All this talk of Tevershall started to make Clifford think more about the mines. Up until then, he had done his best to avoid them, but now he felt somehow a part of them. They were his family's, after all. He suddenly remembered the power that he could really have over the people of Tevershall and over all of the workers in the mines. He knew that the Tevershall mine was in terrible condition now compared to other mines nearby, and he listened with great interest to Mrs. Bolton's news about the neighboring mines. Tevershall used to be the best in England, and now look at it. Just terrible. Everyone thinks it will be shut down in a couple of years or so. Then, what will happen to this poor little town? I don't even want to think about it. Those new mines, they've got all new equipment and some kind of chemical works, which they say is better than just burning the coal. I guess they're making all kinds of money from that. But I don't really know much about it. It sure would be nice if someone could get Tevershall up and running again. Show all those people who are leaving town how foolish they were to give up on us. Clifford suddenly saw the world clearly. He recognized that success was not only to be found in writing books, but in the physical world as well. He had been involved in the soft side of success, but now there was this dark and dirty side of it to consider as well. And this side seemed more admirable to Clifford. These were real men making real money the hard way, with their hands and muscle, even with their blood. He felt power suddenly flowing through his body. He was a man again, thanks to Mrs. Bolton. The next day, he visited the mines and took a tour of them with the manager, who showed him the machinery and different drilling areas. Then he returned home and started to study the mining industry. He learned all the new mining methods and read all kinds of reports about experiments that succeeded and failed. All of this seemed much more interesting to Clifford than art and literature. He was excited by the mining industry, and now he wanted more than anything to bring Tevershall back to life. He felt more alive now than ever. Looking back at his artistic work, it all seemed boring and empty to him. Now he could really do something with his life. Now he could make a difference in the world. Soon, with the help of a talented engineer, Clifford started to experiment with energy at the mines. Based on a lot of modern research from Germany, he found a way to possibly bring more efficient power and electricity to Tevershall. He saw success approaching in the distance, and this excited him a great deal. Chapter 9. Now that his success did not depend on society, Clifford no longer had as many people to the house. Although Connie did not necessarily like most of the people who used to come, she felt all the more lonely now that it was usually just she and Clifford at home. Clifford got deeper and deeper into the mining industry, and it was amazing to watch him as he took control over the managers, engineers, and workers of the plant. He had excellent leadership skills, and he commanded respect among all of the men of the workforce. But Connie knew that inside, behind that tough-looking appearance, Clifford was a very weak and sensitive man. He showed this part of himself to no one but Connie, for she was the only person in the world with whom he felt weak and unimpressive. She somehow made him aware of this side of himself, so he treated her very gently and almost seemed to worship her like a god. He felt that he needed her. It seemed to him that without her, he would be nothing and could do none of the things he had so far achieved. Connie hated to see this weakness in him because it made it necessary for her to remain with him. He was totally dependent on her. She had, however, ways of escaping for short periods of time. The woods always gave her a small sense of freedom. One day, as she was resting by the little well, listening to the water run over the rocks, the gamekeeper suddenly appeared.
"Hello there, your ladyship. I got that key made for you."
He took a key from his pocket and handed it to her. "Thank you very much," she said in return.
"I've still got a few things in the hut, but I'll soon have it all moved, so I won't bother you with my work."
"I told you before, your work would not bother me at all," she said, a little upset.
"Anyhow, I'll have all the birds in their cages early next week,"
he said, and then let out a little cough. Hearing this, Connie noticed that he looked a little unwell. "Are you ill?" she asked.
"Not at all, your ladyship. Just a little cough left over from an earlier illness,"
he said. She began to visit the hut almost every day after that, and each day the cages for the birds became closer and closer to being finished. Connie never once saw the gamekeeper during her visits. Yet, just as he had said, early the following week, the cages were filled with birds and bird eggs. Connie loved to look at them as they sat and warmed the eggs. She tried to feed them from her hand, but found that the birds were not very friendly towards her. Soon, the birds were the only thing in Connie's life that made her feel good about living. Everything else, everyone else, Clifford, Mrs. Bolton, my careless letters, they all made her feel empty and disappointed. She felt so sad that she thought she might die if things continued in this way. Then, one day, she found that one of the eggs had opened and a baby bird was running about the cage. Seeing such a pure and unafraid being made Connie feel both excited and terribly sad. She felt so old and useless. From that time on, she made it a point to visit the birds every day. However, there were days when she was unable to go, due to her responsibility as a hostess for Clifford's occasional business guests. One night, while some men were at the house for tea, Connie secretly left the house through the back door and ran through the woods to the bird cages. When she arrived, she saw the gamekeeper there, preparing the cages for the evening. "So how are they doing? Any more babies?" she asked, looking into the many cages before her.
"I think there are about 36 of them now. A pretty good number,"
he answered. "I wish that I could touch one of them," she said, slowly putting her hand into the cage to pet one of the babies. The mother, however, bent down and bit Connie's hand, and Connie quickly pulled her hand away. "Ouch! I would never hurt one of her birds. She didn't have to do that." The gamekeeper just laughed and placed his hand into the cage. The mother bit him as well, but he was used to it, so he easily grabbed hold of one of the little ones and carefully placed it in Connie's hands. "Oh, they are so cute!" she cried. Both Connie and the gamekeeper sat looking happily at the little bird in her hands. Then the man noticed a wet spot on Connie's arm. She was crying. He immediately stood up and walked away from her. He feared the emotions running through him and felt the need to get away from her. He did not want to be brought back into contact with the outside world. Feelings like he had just had were dangerous and did nothing but open doors to troubles he had long been trying to forget. When he turned around again, he found her trying to gently put the bird back into its cage. She was having some difficulty due to her fear of the mother bird, so he walked back over to her and helped. Connie then turned away and began to cry a little harder. A strong feeling of pity ran through him. He felt sorry for her and wanted to comfort her somehow. Without even realizing it, he put his hand on Connie's shoulder and then began to gently run his hand along her backside. He was not thinking about what he was doing. His hand simply did what it felt it should do.
"Why don't you go on over to the hut for a little bit?"
he suggested as he helped her to her feet and led her back to the little wooden shelter. Once inside, he cleared the furniture from the center of the room and laid a blanket on the ground for Connie to lie upon. He then helped her to the ground and shut the door. The hut had no windows, so the room became very dark. Moments later, Connie felt the gamekeeper lie down next to her and begin to touch her body all over with his hands. His touch was extremely gentle. Connie could feel the nervous excitement in his hands. He knew how to touch a woman, but it was obvious that he was a little unsure of himself with Connie. He then kissed her face and slowly pulled her panties down over her feet. His passion was so great that he did not wait long to put himself inside of her. Immediately, he felt peaceful within her warmth. And she felt it as well, although she did not move during their lovemaking. He finished quickly and then lay against her, holding her tightly. Connie remained still, wondering why this had had to happen in order to make her feel better. She did not quite understand him or herself. She liked the feeling of his body against hers, but she wondered what it all meant to him. A short while later, he got up and dressed. Then he pulled Connie's dress down over her legs and walked out the door. Once she felt that her clothes were back in order, she, too, left the hut and found herself under the light of a bright moon. The gamekeeper accompanied her back to the park entrance.
"Do you regret what we've just done?"
He eventually asked after a long silence. "Not at all," she answered. "Do you?"
"Well, maybe a little. Life has started all over again for me. I hadn't planned for that to happen. But now it has happened, and there's nothing I can do about it."
"I hope you don't hate me," Connie said.
Hate you? I don't hate you. I just worry about Sir Clifford and the rest. I enjoyed our time together. I really did.
"And so did I," she said, although this was not entirely true, for she had been a little surprised by it all, and therefore was unable to enjoy it as much as she had wanted to.
"Well, I'll let you go alone from here."
"Yes, that's a good idea." And then Connie turned and walked through the park to the house. After a few steps, she suddenly whirled around and asked, "Would you like for me to visit you again?"
"Of course,"
the gamekeeper replied. He remained standing there as she walked on toward the house. It upset him to think that he was now, once again, in touch with the world. No longer could he hide from people. She had taken that from him. He wanted to be so far away from people, and yet, here he was about to start a relationship with a woman, which would bring him a lot of social difficulties. Late the next afternoon, even though it was raining, Connie went to the hut. When she arrived, no one was there, so she decided to have a look inside the hut. Everything was put back in its place again. The night was silent through the rain. She knew he was not coming, so she decided to return to the house. However, just then, she saw the gamekeeper's dog come running from the nearby path. Seconds later, the gamekeeper himself appeared. He walked over to her.
"Is it safe for you to come here so often?"
he asked her.
"Don't you worry that people will talk?"
"I don't see why I should worry," Connie answered.
"You know how people are."
"I don't care."
"Yes, but maybe you should care. What will people say when they know you've been with one of your husband's workers?"
"I don't care what others think. You would understand if you knew my situation better." Then Connie thought for a moment and said, "Are you just worried about yourself?"
I am worried, actually, but for both of us,
the gamekeeper replied.
"I just don't want you to do this and then regret it later on."
"Please, let's forget about all of those people and do what we feel is right."
"Why don't we go inside where it's warm and dry?"
They entered, and the gamekeeper lit one of the hanging lights near the doorway. "I have to be back to the house by 7:30, Connie said, as the gamekeeper began to clear a place on the floor for them. He put a couple of blankets down and then took Connie by the hand and gently pulled her down to the ground. He then pulled up her shirt and began to rub his face against her stomach and chest. Then, rolling her over a little, he began to do the same along her back and down along her round buttocks. Connie was not sure what made him want her so much. Something inside of her almost did not want him to touch her so much, but the other half welcomed it gladly. She was even a little afraid. He soon entered her with his penis, and he immediately felt safe and comfortable inside. She, however, remained a little distant from him. She wanted to feel what he seemed to feel, but she could not. He was deep inside of her, but something about it all made her almost want to laugh. She noticed how his buttocks moved up and down and thought about how stupid men looked when they were having sex. How could a woman take such a thing very seriously? Afterward, when he had finished and then rolled over on his back next to her, she lay there very quietly and then began to cry silent tears. He did not realize that she was crying, but he turned and put his arms around her to keep her warm. "I'm sorry, but I have to get back to the house," she said, trying to hide the shakiness of her voice. He did not seem to want to let her go, but he then quickly rose to his feet and dressed. She too pulled down her dress and straightened her clothes for her return to Ragby.
"I'll walk you back. It's too dark for you to walk through these woods alone. You'll fall over all those tree roots."
At the gate, the gamekeeper took hold of Connie before she could pass through.
"I love to touch you,"
he said with great desire in his voice. "I really have to go," she insisted, pushing him from her. She started to walk quickly away, but then, suddenly, turned around and asked him to kiss her one last time. He put his arms around her and kissed her cheek and then her mouth, for she pushed her lips forward to show that she wanted a kiss there as well.
"You come see me soon, huh?"
he said as he let go of her. And then she was gone. They did not see each other for 4 days after that, for Connie tried to stay away so that she could enjoy the feeling of someone waiting for her. But after the 4th day, she wanted, more than anything, to see the gamekeeper again. Even so, on the 5th morning, she walked in the opposite direction from the woods, toward her neighbor's farm, Marahay Farm. When she arrived at the gate, a dog began to bark at her from the other side of the fence. Connie feared dogs, so she did not try to pass through the door. Soon, her neighbor, Mrs. Flint, came out of her front door to see what was wrong. Seeing Connie there, she apologized for her dog and invited her inside. Connie accepted, although she was not in the mood to talk. They chatted a bit over tea, and then Mrs. Flint brought her baby in for Connie to see. Connie was amazed by the purity and innocence of the little person. The feeling so overwhelmed her that she then gave the child back to its mother and stood up to go. Mrs. Flint walked her back to the path. As she watched her neighbor run back to her house, Connie thought about how lucky she was to have a baby. Then a noise frightened her from behind. She turned around and found the gamekeeper standing in the path.
"What are you doing here?"
he asked. "I just wanted to go to Marahay," she answered, still a little surprised.
"Have you gone to the hut?"
Connie felt embarrassed by this question and looked away for a moment before answering, "No, I'm really late. Clifford will wonder where I am."
"Are you trying to avoid me?"
he asked with a little smile. "Of course not. I just—"
"What's wrong? Come here,"
he said as he approached her and put his arm around her, pressing their bodies close together. "I can't do this now. I have to get back." She said this, but desire was starting to grow deep within her. He wrapped his arms tighter around her and told her that he had to have her. He could not wait any longer.
"Come, let's go over there. Nobody will see us."
She let him pull her to an area where there were a lot of trees to hide behind. There, he took off his coat and laid it on the ground for her to lay upon. She looked into his eyes and could see how much he wanted her. Soon he was on top of her, his skin touching hers, and then he came into her. She remained very still and let him do all of the work. As he moved about inside of her, she began to feel a strong sense of pleasure that began between her legs and started to move outward to all parts of her body. Something was very different. This feeling she was experiencing was a new one. She was crying out and did not even realize it. With every move the gamekeeper made, a great feeling passed through her entire body. Her cries became louder and louder, and then they stopped at the same time that the gamekeeper reached his climax. Then they both lay there silent and out of breath. Soon the gamekeeper stood up and began to put his trousers on. Connie did not move. She was still a little lost inside herself. She wished he had not gotten up, but stayed there with her. She hoped that he would always be with her, from this day forward.
It seems that we had our orgasm together,
he said, while pulling his shirt over his head.
There are many people in the world who never once experienced that in their lives.
Have you ever done that with any other women? Connie asked, knowing that he would not tell her the truth.
I'm not really sure.
He kneeled down to where she was laying and kissed her forehead. Then, helping Connie to her feet and brushing all of the sticks and leaves from her clothing, he said,
You'd better go on back alone. I'll wait here for a while.
She smiled at him and then started to walk back down the path toward Ragby. As she walked, she thought about how strongly she seemed to feel about the gamekeeper, and how wonderful it would be to have a child from this man. But then, this very same feeling started to frighten her, because she feared losing control of herself. Connie fought with her feelings, but, in the end, decided to take a chance at falling in love with him. I visited the Flints' home to see their baby, Connie told Clifford later that day. I hope you weren't worried.
No, I assumed you'd stopped in somewhere for tea,
he answered. However, Clifford did notice something different in Connie, but he thought it had only to do with the baby she had seen. Well, I've been saying all along that it'd be the best thing for you to get out more often, Mrs. Bolton said. She had the feeling that the lady must have a lover, but she could not guess who it might be. For the rest of the day and night, Clifford felt a little uncomfortable with Connie. In the evening, she did not listen when he read to her, but sat there sewing a dress for the Flints' baby. And at the end of the night, she did not even bother to kiss him before going to her room. He was terribly angry.
What a selfish woman,
he thought to himself.
A baby. She wants a baby only for herself, not for us.
Late into the night, Clifford stayed up playing chess with Mrs. Bolton. He found her company very comforting, for he knew that she would always be there for him as long as he could pay her. Mrs. Bolton, meanwhile, was thinking about her dead husband, Ted, and the lady's mysterious lover. She felt that she could somehow understand and share Lady Chatterley's dislike of Sir Clifford, but this did not prevent her from enjoying the honor of playing cards with him, even though she lost every time. The gamekeeper was also without sleep this night. He was thinking about his past, his wife, who he now hated more than anyone in the world, his time in the military in both India and Egypt, where he began as a horseman and moved up to the position of an officer, his return to England, and the desire to live a simple life, away from people. He did not want to care about anything or anyone anymore. But then, this woman came along and brought meaning back into his life. Now, he had to start worrying again, worrying about her husband, about his wife, about the talk around the village, and about the future. He got up and went outside with his dog. He walked all night, looking for hunters, trying to forget his worries. At the end of the night, he found himself standing in front of Ragby Hall. He wanted to be with her. If he had known which room was hers, he might very well have entered the house and gone to her. At that moment, Mrs. Bolton turned off the light and went to close the curtains. But as she looked outside the window, she saw a dark figure standing in the distance with a gun in his hand. She was frightened at first. However, as she looked closer, she saw that it was the gamekeeper. He had not seen her, for he was too busy looking up at the second-story windows like a lost lover. "Wait, that's it," she thought to herself. "Oliver Mellors is Lady Chatterley's lover." She could not help but laugh a little inside herself when she thought about how angry Sir Clifford would be if he knew. Then the gamekeeper turned and walked away from the house, his dog following close behind. He had decided to let Connie come to him. He knew that he could not force her to be with him. It could only happen if they both wanted it. So he headed back to his home to wait patiently for her. Chapter 10. One day, as Connie and Mrs. Bolton were going through one of the many storage rooms in Ragby Hall to find items to give away for charity, they found an old baby carriage. "It's too bad you won't be needing this, my lady," Mrs. Bolton said. "Oh, but it's very possible I may have a baby one day," Connie replied, without looking at her. "But, I mean, how—" "It's only Sir Clifford's legs that are damaged. His penis still works quite well enough to bring a baby into this world," Connie said. She was lying, of course. Clifford had recently been trying to persuade her that this was true. Even though she knew it was impossible, the idea of having his baby made her feel horrible. "Well, wouldn't that be wonderful?" said Mrs. Bolton, recovering from her surprise. She thought to herself that it would probably be Oliver Mellors' child, although Sir Clifford would be called the father. The idea of this made her laugh to herself again. The son of a gamekeeper growing up in, and one day taking control over, Ragby Hall. How perfect! Just then, Connie came across an old box full of makeup and writing instruments. Connie felt that it was terribly ugly. "My goodness! Look at this thing," she said. "Oh, how lovely! I've always wanted something like this," cried Mrs. Bolton. "Well, it's yours then." "Oh, my lady, I couldn't possibly accept this. It's much too nice for a simple old woman like me. Please, if you don't take it, I'll just give it away to someone else." "Well, in that case, thank you so much." The next day, Mrs. Bolton took her black box into the village to show all of her friends. Naturally, the conversation turned to Lady Chatterley's mention of possibly having a child soon. Nothing was ever said of the gamekeeper, however. Word then quickly spread throughout the village of the Chatterleys' plans to have a baby. It only took a few days for the news to get back to Ragby itself. Squire Winter, an owner of the neighboring Shipley mines, was paying Clifford a visit, and in the middle of their discussion on new methods of coal production, suddenly came out with the question,
"Tell me, is it true what I've been hearing? Is there to be a child running about Ragby Hall soon?"
Clifford sat silent for a moment, and then said,
"That's what people are saying. Well, Connie and I are hoping to have a child one day. I just didn't realize that other people were aware of it." "Ah, that is wonderful. A boy, I hope. Someone who could continue your work after you grow old and keep Tevershal's men working. Absolutely wonderful news, my boy."
Later that evening, Clifford asked Connie if she knew why people in town might be talking about such things. "I've no idea. Are they joking?"
"Well, I should hope not. I truly want to one day have a child."
Connie said nothing. She decided to change the subject. "By the way, my father sent a letter saying that I'm to travel to Venice with him and my sister in July and August."
"What? So long?"
asked Clifford, a little upset. "It'd only be 3 weeks. You don't mind, do you?"
"I'd only mind if you decided never to come back."
"Oh, don't worry about that. Of course I'll return," she said, thinking about the gamekeeper.
"I suppose it'd be good for you after all."
"Oh, yes. I just love Venice. Why don't you come with me?"
No. I'm not leaving the country. I've too much to do now. Maybe next year I'll travel. We'll see."
Connie then left the room, disappointed. She had meant it when she suggested that he come along. Actually, she had very little desire to go to Venice, for a new man had entered her life. But she was going anyway, because she felt that if she did become pregnant by the gamekeeper, Clifford would think the father was an Italian man, which would be much more acceptable to him than the other. Chapter 11. The next day, after lunch, Connie immediately left for the woods. The day was beautiful, with flowers of all colors just beginning to open. She was looking for the gamekeeper, and when she found that he was not at the hut, she walked on toward his home. When she arrived, she found the front door wide open, and the dog, Flossie, came running out to greet her. Inside, the gamekeeper was seated at his dining table, eating. He got up to meet her at the door. "Would you mind if I came inside?" she asked.
"Please,"
he said, gesturing for her to enter. As she walked through the door, She could smell the recently cooked meat and saw a glass of beer sitting half-drunk on the table. He offered her something to eat and drink, which she accepted on the condition that she help herself. While making some tea and clearing his dining table for him, Connie sensed that he was feeling a little sad. "What's wrong? Are you feeling bad today?"
No. I just don't like people very much, and I had to deal with 2 illegal hunters today. Had to go all the way to Outhwaite. I like my job, but I hate it when it requires me to go into town.
"Why don't you just stop working? You probably have enough money to retire and live simply."
No. The time I stop working is the time that I stop living. I have to work, and it has to be for another person, or else I'll get lazy.
Connie felt that he was not paying enough attention to her now. She wished that he would show more interest. "I'm going to Venice in a few weeks," she said.
How long will you be away?
"Just about a month, but Clifford's staying here. He doesn't enjoy travel."
Too bad for him.
After a moment of silence, Connie quietly added, "I told him that I may have a child." This, finally, caught the attention of the gamekeeper. He looked at her very seriously and asked,
And how did he respond? Did you say anything about me?
"He's okay with it, as long as he can act as the father. Of course, I didn't mention you. I told him that I might have a short relationship with an Italian."
Ah, I see.
"I won't, of course. I just want it to seem like I did. Clifford can't know that you're the father." He stood, looking quietly out the window.
So, you only want a child from me, then?
"Not exactly," she answered.
Well, then what exactly do you want?
He said angrily. "I'm not sure." This answer only made the gamekeeper even angrier.
Well, fine. Have your child and give it to Clifford. I don't care. I've been used by women before, but at least this time I can enjoy it a little more.
"But I'm not using you. I liked the way you looked," she tried to explain. He just laughed at this and said,
Well, great. I like your appearance too, so why don't we just go upstairs and give each other what we both want and be done with it?
"No, I want to do it in the hut, not here.
So let's go.
I have to return home now."
But
"Thanks for the tea." And then she left, feeling horrible. That whole afternoon she felt uncomfortable. She could not stop thinking about him and felt that she had to see him. So, a little later, after tea time, she quietly left the house through the side door and ran to the hut, hoping he would be there waiting. He was there, feeding the chickens in their cages. "Do you want me?" she asked him directly. He took her by the arm and led her to the hut. Inside, after putting blankets on the floor, he had her lay down while he took off his clothing. Then he got under the blanket with her and, after raising her dress, took hold of her breasts and kissed her nipples. She put her arms around him, but found that she felt quite afraid. She lay there the whole time, without moving, thinking about how stupid men looked while having sex. She wanted to laugh at the movement of the gamekeeper's buttocks up and down as he tried to push his silly little penis ever deeper inside her. She wanted to get away from him, to get away from this disgustingly foolish act. Afterward, when he had finished and was lying quietly next to her, she began to cry softly. He, however, did not notice.
"You just lied there this time,"
he said suddenly. She started crying harder and said, "It's impossible for me to love you. I want to, but I just can't."
"Well, I guess that's okay then. Let's just enjoy our sex at least,"
he said, getting up and starting to dress himself. Connie suddenly took hold of him, crying, "No, please don't leave me." The gamekeeper put his arms around her, and she felt all of her fears disappear. She now wanted him, and the rise of his penis told her that he, too, wanted her. When he entered her again, she felt great peace and completely opened herself up to him. It was as if she were an ocean. The deeper he went inside her, separating the waters, further and further uncovering her, the more naked she became, until, finally, it seemed he could go no further. And it was at this moment that she felt she had become a complete woman. When she felt his penis leaving her, she suddenly realized how beautiful the moment had truly been, and she cried out, not wanting him to go away from her. She needed him inside of her. So this was man, she thought to herself. This was what she had wanted her whole life. And now she had found it. And just after being disgusted by it, gently touching his balls and penis, she could not help thinking about how mysterious man's beauty was. She could not explain the way she felt, so she remained silent. However, after a while, she needed to hear him speak. "Do you love me?" she asked.
"Isn't it clear how I feel? I love that I can come inside of you, that I can fuck you,"
he answered. "Do you still think I only want you for a baby?"
"Nah, I suppose you could have a child with anybody."
"How much do you care about me?" she then asked. He only kissed her and ran his hand along her body, sliding it in between her legs. And then she remained silent for fear that her words might frighten him and push him away from her. She went home feeling more alive than ever before. Chapter 12. Clifford, one Sunday, had a strong desire to go into the woods. He wanted to be outside among the spring flowers. Mrs. Bolton helped him into his motorized wheelchair, and then he drove himself to where Connie was waiting, at the front of the house.
"Here I come, riding upon my horse,"
he joked. Connie laughed at this. She did not want to go into the woods with him today, but it was good to see that he was in such a fine mood. He stopped for a moment to look over his house.
"You know, I think the old place is in need of some repairs. I think I should have enough money to get some work done on it next year."
"Let's just hope that the miners don't decide to stop working," Connie said.
"Ah, they won't destroy the industry that puts money in their pockets and feeds their families. Anyway, they will have little to say about it, for I will give them little choice."
"I don't think they'll like that very much."
"That's no concern of mine. These people were made to be ruled over, and I plan to run this business the way I feel it should be run, not the way they feel it should be."
"But is that fair?"
"No, it's just how things are.
"The people are so unhappy, though."
They just have to accept their place in life and make the most of it. It's because they don't do this that they're so unhappy."
Connie did not want to hear any more of this. Clifford's view of people sometimes seemed so cold and cruel. She walked on in silence.
My goodness, how beautiful it is here,
Clifford shouted as the wheels of his chair flattened the flowers growing along the path.
Such color, such a wonderful smell. I think that I shall ride as far as the well.
Can your chair make it back up the hill? Asked Connie.
As they say, nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Connie watched as he charged ahead in his chair and rounded a corner out of sight. Then, from behind her, came a whistle. She turned and found the gamekeeper standing behind a nearby tree. He approached her and gently touched her breast.
Hey there.
He whispered.
I'll see you tonight, right? About 10 o'clock?
I'll meet you at the gate to the woods, she answered, a little nervous. Then the sound of Clifford's horn made her jump and start running back along the path. The gamekeeper stood smiling and then disappeared again into the trees. When Connie caught up with Clifford, he was already at the well. They exchanged a few meaningless words, and then each took a drink of the well water. Wow! It's so cold, Connie exclaimed. Shall we turn back now?
Onwards and upwards,
Clifford replied, starting back on the path toward his home.
Hi-ya!
He shouted to his chair.
Let's show them what we can do.
But as it began to climb the hill back toward Ragby, the chair started to slow and make strange sounds until it finally stopped and would go no further. Let's sound the horn for the gamekeeper, Connie suggested. He can probably help us.
No, let's just let the engine cool a bit,
Clifford answered. He waited a few moments and then tried to restart the chair. It made a terrible sound, as if the engine were about to completely fall apart. Why don't I just try to push you a bit? Said Connie.
No, don't touch the chair, damn it. I wish that I could just take a look inside. I'm sure I could fix it.
And finally, after several unsuccessful attempts at starting the engine, Clifford sounded the horn for the gamekeeper to come. Within moments he appeared.
How can I help you, Sir Clifford? Can you fix a motor? I'm sorry, but I know almost nothing about engines, sir. Well, then just take a look in there and see if anything looks wrong.
Clifford yelled impatiently. The keeper got on the ground and took a look under the machine.
Well?
Asked Sir Clifford.
Nothing that I can see looks broken, sir.
The keeper then came out from under the chair, and Clifford again began to try to start the engine, but this time with even greater force. He seemed to be doing more damage to the chair than good.
I think it'll go if I push from behind,
the keeper suggested as he approached the chair.
Don't touch her. She can do it on her own,
shouted Sir Clifford angrily.
But, sir, you're going to destroy it the way you're pushing her now. I know what I'm doing. Keep away. She won't go, sir. Shut up and let her try at least.
Again, his efforts failed, but as soon as the gamekeeper tried to help, Clifford yelled at him. It went on this way for quite a while, until it became clear that Clifford could do nothing. He sat in his chair, terribly angry and helpless.
It seems I will need a push after all,
he finally managed to say.
Would you mind helping me, Mellors? Not at all, sir.
answered the keeper. However, when he gave the machine a push, it would not move. The brake had become stuck. The gamekeeper then asked Connie to come over and pull the wheel loose after he lifted the chair. "No, you shouldn't lift it. It's far too heavy." But the gamekeeper gave her a serious look that told her there was not much choice. So, with all his strength, he lifted the chair. Connie pulled on the back wheels, and suddenly the chair began to move again. The keeper fell back, but then quickly placed a stone under the wheel, so that it would not roll backward. He then sat down and put his head in his hands. He had clearly been hurt. "Are you okay?" Connie cried, running over to him.
Yes, I'm fine,"
he said, turning away from her quickly. Connie then looked back toward Clifford. He had his back toward them and did not seem concerned about anything. She remembered all of his talk about ruling the common people and felt anger, pure anger, toward him. The keeper got to his feet and started to push the chair again. "I'm going to help you," she said angrily, as she joined him behind the chair. As they pushed together, Connie was able to look at the gamekeeper's hands carefully. These were the hands that touched her so gently. She placed her hand on his, and then secretly kissed it behind Clifford's back. When they finally made it to the top of the hill, the keeper was able to push the chair on his own.
"Well, Mellors, you must be tired after all that. Why don't you get yourself some food from the kitchen?"
Clifford offered.
"I think they should have finished preparing dinner by now." "Thanks anyway, sir. I'm going to my mother's for dinner." "Very well."
Later, at dinner, Connie could not keep her feelings inside, for she was very angry with Clifford. "How can you be so rude?" she asked.
"To whom?"
"To the gamekeeper. He almost killed himself helping you today, and you don't seem to care at all."
"Why should I care? It's his job. That's what I pay him £8 per month to do. And I give him a house as well."
"You act as though you're a greater man than he. Who are you to rule these people? You treat them like animals. I tell you, I was embarrassed today by your behavior. Completely embarrassed. You're no man at all." Clifford said nothing, but called for Mrs. Bolton. Connie then left the room and went up to her quarters. She felt that she hated him and could no longer live with him. He was nothing but a cold, dead thing to her. She changed her clothes and put on a dark gray coat. It was around 9:30. Clifford and Mrs. Bolton were playing chess and would probably continue to do so until at least 12 o'clock. She knew that there was very little chance of anyone calling for her or coming up to her bedroom. And if in the morning she was discovered coming back into the house, she could simply say that she had taken an early morning walk. With all this in mind, she quietly left Ragby through the side door and ran, unseen, into the woods to meet her lover. Chapter 13. They met at the gate to the woods, and he held the light low at her feet, so that she could see where she was going in the darkness.
"Any problem getting away?"
he asked. "None at all," she replied. "What about this morning? Did you hurt yourself?"
"No, I guess I've just never quite recovered from my illness in India."
"I'm sure that you hate Clifford."
Ah, I don't hate people like him. They are just men without any balls.
Balls? Connie asked.
You know, between the legs, balls. I mean, he has no fire in him. He's kind of calm and womanish.
And you don't think of yourself as calm?
Not really.
She walked next to him silently for the rest of the way and wondered why she was with him. When they finally got to his home, he shut the door and locked it behind him. Connie could not help thinking that it was as if she were being held prisoner. She sat down in one of the dining table chairs while the gamekeeper fed his dog and removed his boots. The house was hardly decorated at all. She saw only one picture on the wall, an ugly one of two people who seemed to have just gotten married. "Is that you there in that picture?" she asked him. He turned and looked behind him as he finished with his boots.
Oh, that. I'd almost forgotten about that. Yes, I'm afraid that's me just before I married. I hate that picture.
"Well, if you don't like it, why don't you burn it?" Connie suggested. He looked at the picture again and thought about what she had said. It really was an embarrassing picture. His wife had left it here on purpose so that he might miss her.
You know, that's not a bad idea at all,
he said, getting up and removing the picture from the wall. He then went into the kitchen to get a hammer. When he returned, he began to take the picture apart. When he finished, he took one last look at it.
My God, look at me, so clean and stupid. And look at her, so cruel-looking. Why couldn't I see that back then?
He wondered aloud. Then he tore the picture into little pieces and threw them all into the fire. "Why don't you get divorced?" Connie asked. The gamekeeper suddenly looked up at Connie with a serious look in his eye.
I suppose that I never felt I'd find another person to love, and seeing as I hate dealing with people, I thought I could avoid going through all that. However, I suppose you're right. I should just divorce her and be done with it all.
Connie liked hearing this. She asked the keeper to tell her more about his wife.
Well, I had a couple of girlfriends before her, but none of them liked sex. They couldn't enjoy it, so I left them all. When I met my wife, Bertha, I thought I was the luckiest man in the world, for she wanted me and loved the sex. So we married and fucked like two little bunny rabbits. But then she started to get lazy and wouldn't do anything around the house. This made me angry, and we began to fight more often. Soon she stopped having sex with me when I wanted it. It seemed that she only wanted sex when I didn't want it, and she became selfish with sex too. I'd always give it to her whenever she was ready, even if I didn't really want to. Then she'd take the longest time to come to her climax. She would force me to lie there and let her do all the work, jumping up and down on top of me for the longest time. Bang, 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 bang. I tell you, I hated it. There was no feeling in that woman. Anyway, we started to hate each other. When the child came, I decided to join the war and got as far away from her as I could. After Bertha, I decided that I'd never have another woman again.
"So what do you think about me?" asked Connie.
I guess I feel both happy and sad. I know that difficulties are going to follow, but I also enjoy being with you.
Connie told him that she could understand his feelings, because she, too, had had bad experiences with men in the past. She had also felt that there were no men out there in the world for her. "We need to just forget about all of that," she said.
Ah, terrible things will happen to us soon enough, believe me.
He said darkly. "Don't say that," she cried, running into his arms. "You're so negative. You talk about women being cold, but look at how you're being now."
All this time, I'd just known what I wanted from a woman. I wanted a woman who could reach her climax at the same time I did. I wanted someone who could fuck with feeling. Most people cannot. They only care about themselves.
"But you seem to be just as cold sometimes as these people you're complaining about," Connie countered.
Well, if that's how you see it,"
said the gamekeeper, moving away from her.
"I'll sleep down here and you can have the bed upstairs."
"What? What's wrong with you now?" The gamekeeper looked up at her then and saw how confused she was by his behavior. He then felt sorry and took her into his arms again.
"I'm sorry. Let's not fight. I love you and your soft skin."
He then placed his hands under her shirt and began to feel about her breasts. Her softness soon made him very hard.
"Let's promise to be together,"
he said. "Really?" she said, looking up at him with hopeful eyes.
"Yes, really, with all of my heart and penis."
Then he came into her there, in front of the fire, where the picture had burned. When they finished, they went up to bed and slept. The next morning, Connie awoke to find the gamekeeper watching her sleeping as he lay next to her, running his finger along her breasts. It felt wonderful to wake up in his home. She felt free and easy. She took off her nightgown and asked him to take his pajamas off. "Would you open the window and let the sunshine come into the room?" she asked him. He got up from the bed and walked, naked, to the window. He became embarrassed and covered himself as he turned back to face Connie. "No, don't hide it. Let me see all of your body. Ah, how beautiful you are." He returned to the bed, and she crawled to the end to meet him, letting her two breasts gently touch the end of his penis. "He seems so confident, doesn't he?" Connie said. The gamekeeper looked down at the area between his legs. His penis was surrounded by dark red hair.
"His name's John Thomas, and I believe that he wants some cunt right about now. Isn't that right, John Thomas? How about some Lady Jane?"
And then he took hold of Connie and entered her again. Afterward, they lay still for a while. She took a look at the gamekeeper's penis under the blankets. "Look at how small he is now. He seems so harmless." And then she took hold of it and kissed it very softly. Immediately, she could feel its hardness beginning to return.
"Yes, he is yours. Do whatever you want with him,"
the gamekeeper said to her. She rolled the man over and got on top of him, placing John Thomas deep inside of herself. A wave of pleasure moved through her whole body as she moved. Soon, the morning whistle of the neighboring mine could be heard. It was 7 o'clock.
"I guess you need to be going,"
said the gamekeeper. Connie hated it that she had to return to that other home, that other life. "Do you love me?" she asked.
"Now, do I have to say it for you to know it?"
"Don't ever let me go. Can you promise me? I want to live with you. Do you want that?"
"Yes,"
he answered.
"I do. But you shouldn't ask me this now. It's a little too soon. Give me some time. I love being in bed with you. I love your legs and your ass. Just don't make me say such things now. Give me time."
Then he rose, dressed himself, and went downstairs. Connie did the same, although she really did not want to leave. Before going out the door, she turned to him. I know it's impossible here, but soon I want to live with you." She then left and returned to Ragby, where she snuck, unseen, back to her bedroom. Chapter 14. That morning, Connie found a letter from her sister, Hilda, waiting for her on the dining room table. It said that she would be arriving at Ragby on Thursday, the 17th, and that Connie should be ready to go. Hilda did not want to see Clifford. The idea of Connie going to Venice made Clifford feel quite horrible. He liked her being around. Her presence comforted him and allowed him to concentrate on his work with the coal mines. Every day, he would talk with her about his plans for the mines, and then he would turn on the radio and sit for hours, listening and thinking up more plans. At night, he did nothing but play cards with Mrs. Bolton, who seemed to enjoy the games, even though she lost every single time. All of this made Clifford seem more and more dead to Connie. "I'm leaving on the 17th, she said to him, "and I'll be back by the 20th of July.
Now, you're sure you will return?
Clifford asked her.
I mean, you won't just run away and never come back, will you?
Of course not. Clifford had mixed feelings. He wanted her to go and get pregnant, but he also feared that she might fall in love with someone and leave him. Connie, of course, did want to leave him, but she knew that this was not yet the right time. She discussed her plans with the gamekeeper. When I return from Venice, I'll tell Clifford that I'm leaving him, and then you and I can go far away from here. I asked my father, and he told me that I'll receive £600 every year. Maybe we could go to another country.
Yes, but we both should divorce our spouses first, don't you think?
He said. Yes, of course. But how difficult a task that seemed to Connie. Her thoughts then wandered back to the gamekeeper and his life before Ragby. She asked him how he had liked being a soldier in the English army.
I liked my leader, but then he died, and I almost died with him.
Weren't you supposed to become an officer in the army? She asked.
Yes, I could have, but let me tell you, the other officers were all a bunch of ladies without balls who thought that they knew everything there was to know in the world. And that's how most of the middle-class people are these days. I hate every one of them. In fact, I think everyone is becoming this way in the world. They're all turning into machine-loving idiots. Give them another 10,000 years, and I promise you there won't be any people left on this earth. They'll have killed each other completely because they're starting to feel less and less.
If you believe this, then what do you think about having a child? The gamekeeper suddenly looked down at the ground.
Yes, I don't like the idea of bringing a child into this horrible world.
Oh, please don't talk like that, Connie cried. I think that I'm pregnant now with your child. If you don't want it, then you'll never really want me either. He said nothing. She felt that he was a little upset because she was going away to Venice. She liked it that he was jealous. Quickly, she went over to him and put her hands under his shirt and into his pants. She took his balls and penis into her hands and gently held them. Please, say that you want the child, she said.
Well, sometimes I do have the desire to tell people of Tevershaw. Look at yourself. What's happened to you all? Stop working for money, for it's only made you ugly and unhappy. We could destroy Tevershaw and rebuild it with beautiful buildings and homes. That's my hope, my dream.
The whole time he was saying this, Connie was putting little flowers in the hair around his penis. She was admiring the 4 different colors of hair that he had all around his body. Dark and light red and dark and light brown, all in different areas. Then she heard the sound of heavy rain coming down outside, and she had the sudden desire to run out into it. She pulled her gown over her head and ran down the stairs and out the door into the rain. The gamekeeper went to the front door and watched as she danced about in the grass. He then took all of his clothing off and ran out after her. Connie ran from him into the woods. As the gamekeeper came closer and closer to her, he could feel himself wanting her more and more. When finally he caught up with her, he took hold of her from behind and forced her to the muddy ground on her hands and knees. Then he grabbed her buttocks, pulled them toward him, and entered her. She felt warm inside. He fucked her like an animal and came to his climax very quickly. He then pulled Connie to her feet, and they ran, together, back into his home, where they could sit in front of the warm fire and dry themselves. Inside, as Connie was drying her hair in front of the fire, the gamekeeper took a good look at her shapely body. He placed his hand on her back and moved it along her spine, all the way down to her round buttocks.
You have a wonderful ass. I'd say that you have the most beautiful ass in the world. The kind of ass a real man wants, a real ass.
As he said this, he touched her 2 holes.
And here's where you shit and piss. I like it that you can shit and piss. There's no shame in that. Yes, this is a real ass for a real man.
Connie moved towards him, sat on his lap, and asked him to kiss her. The gamekeeper then took some flowers from the table and started to put them in the hair between her legs.
Now, that's where these flowers belong,
he said. Yes, it's very pretty down there. Then she looked up into the gamekeeper's face, where the light of the fire reflected a beautiful yellow and orange. Does it bother you that I'm going away? She asked. You know that I'm only going so that I can find an easy way to leave Clifford, right?
But he thinks you're coming back.
Oh, I will return. I must. But I'm not coming back to him. I'm coming back to you. When I return, we can make our plans to go away.
How?
Asked the gamekeeper, looking a little upset and disbelieving. What's wrong? Don't you trust me? Don't you think it'd be better for me to get away from Ragby for a while?
Oh, of course,
he said with anger in his voice. I'm leaving on Thursday, you know.
I discussed my divorce with a lawyer the other day.
And what did he say? Connie asked, a little surprised.
He said that it should be okay, as long as my wife doesn't cause any problems. I've got to behave well for the next 6 months as well. So maybe it's good that you'll be gone for a few weeks.
I want to sleep with you again before I leave. Let's plan to do it the night before I go. I'll arrange everything with my sister.
I don't know. That sounds pretty dangerous. It would be very easy for us to get caught.
No, not at all. I'll have Hilda bring me here in her car and pick me up early the next morning. I'll even wear a hat and glasses, so no one will recognize me in town.
All right.
But doesn't that make you happy?
Yes, of course it does,
he said sadly.
I just worry a little, that's all.
Well, stop it. The gamekeeper then ran out the door and into the woods. Connie watched as he disappeared into the trees. Her heart hurt from fear that he had angrily left the house. However, moments later, he reappeared with a lot of flowers in his arms. He came to where she was laying and began to cover her with the flowers, placing them around her breasts and down among the hairs between her legs. He then wrapped some around his penis, and she put some in his chest hair.
This is all for the wedding of John Thomas and Lady Jane.
They laughed together for a while and kissed one another playfully. Then it came time for Connie to go. The gamekeeper watched as she got dressed.
I suppose that it's possible Lady Jane may find a man in Venice who will place flowers in her hair and feed her special fruits of the Mediterranean.
Don't say such things. He didn't say anything after that. He just kissed her breasts, her belly, and the hair between her legs. And when she had finished dressing, he walked her back to the entrance of the wood near Ragby. There they found Mrs. Bolton in the park. "Why, there you are, my lady," she cried. "We were starting to worry that something had happened to you." The gamekeeper looked at her, smiling.
Yes, here she is, ma'am, safe as always. I'll be going now. Good night to you both.
And then he disappeared again into the woods. Chapter 15. Connie was a little upset with Mrs. Bolton, for it was clear that she knew what was going on between her and the gamekeeper. "It makes me so angry with Clifford, sending people to hunt for me like this. But, my lady, if I hadn't come, surely the others would have found you much earlier than this." Connie understood that Mrs. Bolton had helped her, so she stopped complaining, but inside she was still very upset with Clifford. When she arrived home, she walked straight into his room, ready for a fight.
My goodness, woman,
Clifford shouted upon seeing Connie enter his room.
where in the hell have you been? What have you been doing in the forest all this time?
Seeing him so angry, Connie immediately became calm. She did not shout back at him, but spoke in a soft, gentle voice. "I was sitting in the hut, enjoying the rain," she answered, taking her hat off.
What's happened to your hair?
"I ran out in the rain without clothing,"
You did what?
Clifford cried.
Did anyone see you? Did the gamekeeper see you?
No one saw me, but the gamekeeper did come by to feed his birds later, after the rain stopped. Clifford did not know what to say to her. In his heart, he was impressed with her beauty. She looked so healthy and alive at this moment. He immediately calmed down.
Well, at least you're here now and you've not caught a cold.
Later that evening, after dinner, he tried to be as nice to Connie as he could. Picking up the latest book he was reading, he asked her what she thought about the author's idea that the universe was slowly dying, but spiritually growing at the same time. Connie, who was thinking only about her gamekeeper and how much he had said he loved her ass, was not in the mood for Clifford's talk. "I think it's stupid," she said.
Ah, but that's just because women don't enjoy thinking about such important things.
"Well, there's no shame in that," she said, giving Clifford a serious look. "People like the writer of that book have no feeling, Their bodies are dead, while their brains go on living. I much prefer to enjoy my body the way it was meant to be enjoyed."
My goodness, I know you're eager to go to Venice and have your fun, but please try to hide it from me a little more.
"Fine, I will." Then Thursday arrived, and Hilda came. She had a beautiful, strong-minded look about her. It was because of this strong-mindedness that her husband was now divorcing her. This did not bother her, however. She was ready to take a long break from men and just raise her 2 children all on her own. "So, who is this lover that you absolutely must see tonight?" Hilda asked her sister as they sat chatting in Connie's room. "Well, he's our gamekeeper, actually," she answered, a little embarrassed. "The gamekeeper?" Hilda whispered disgustedly. "It'll never work." "You don't understand. I love him very much. He's the only man I've ever known who feels anything. I love him so much, I'm going to have his child. Oh, my God, Connie!" Hilda hated to think that her sister was in love with such a low person. Clifford was bad enough, but a gamekeeper? That was too much. She tried to change Connie's mind about going to the gamekeeper's home that night, but Connie insisted. She had to see him before leaving. Finally, Hilda gave up the fight and agreed to Connie's plan. Later that afternoon, everyone said their goodbyes as Connie loaded her things onto Hilda's car. Then they drove off to the neighboring town of Mansfield, where Hilda got a room for the night. For the rest of the afternoon and early evening, the 2 sisters talked about Connie's situation. Hilda felt that it was impossible for women like them to get close to working people because their lives were so completely different. Connie, however, believed in her worker too much to let any of Hilda's ideas bother her. She told her sister all about his past, even about his wife. In the end, Hilda realized that it was useless to fight Connie. She really was very much in love. Then it came time to go. Connie wore her hat and glasses so that no one would recognize her along the way to the gamekeepers. When they finally arrived at the woods near his home, he was there waiting for them. Connie got out of the car and ran over to him, but Hilda did not move from her seat, nor did she bother to look at the man. "Oh, why don't you come and spend a little time with us?" Connie said to her sister. "I'd like for you to meet each other. If you're worried about your car, just park it among those trees over there and bring your keys with you." The gamekeeper then helped to guide Hilda as she moved her car into the area Connie had suggested. Hilda did not seem happy, but she thought it would be embarrassing to refuse her sister at this moment. When they were all on the path to the gamekeeper's home, Connie introduced everyone to one another. The keeper and Hilda barely looked at one another, but said hello all the same. When they got to the keeper's home, he offered Hilda something to eat and drink. Both sisters asked for beer. He brought out some bread and cheese and then, after taking off his coat, joined them at the table. They ate without speaking for a while. Hilda noticed that the man's table manners were, actually, much better than her own. Was this man pretending to be somebody he was not? She thought to herself. Finally, she spoke. Do you really think this is a good idea, you and my sister? Hilda, please, don't be rude, Connie said. Well, I just think people need to keep living their life without too much change, Hilda went on.
Well, I hear that you're getting divorced.
The gamekeeper said, clearly annoyed.
Now, I believe that involves a bit of change, wouldn't you agree? God, a woman like you would make a man really unhappy. I can see it as clear as day.
How can you talk to me like this? Hilda shouted. You're a little too sure of yourself, I'd say. My sister can change her mind quite easily. I promise you that.
Well, all I know is that your sister has come to my bed knowing what she wants, and I've given it to her.
The keeper said with a smile.
And I'll tell you, this sister of yours can really please a man with that cunt of hers. A woman like you, however, you're pretty on the outside, but I'll bet that on the inside you're all dead. You've got nothing to give a man, and that's why your husband has left you, and that's why you'll always be alone.
Hilda then quickly got to her feet and put her coat on. I'll be going now, she said. Both Connie and the gamekeeper walked her back to the car in total silence. When they arrived at the road, Hilda went straight to the car and started the engine. Don't make me wait for you in the morning, Connie, she said. Then she drove off into the darkness, leaving Connie and the gamekeeper all alone. They walked back to the house, again without speaking. When they finally arrived, Connie was the first to speak. I can't believe what you said to Hilda. She was smiling as she said this.
That woman needs to be hit,
he replied as he took his boots off. Then they lit a candle and went upstairs to bed. That night they had very wild sex. She let the gamekeeper do as he pleased. There was no love in his movements. It was pure sexual desire. Connie thought that any other woman might have felt ashamed of being treated so roughly, but for her, the shame disappeared. All this time, she had feared men and their animal behavior, but now she seemed to understand. His penis had gone so deep inside of her. It had found her center and made her more naked than ever before. There was no hiding from him or herself any longer. All of her shame was now dead. This man was not ashamed either. Most other men were weak and confused about their desire. This man, the gamekeeper, knew what he wanted, and he helped Connie to realize what she wanted. The next morning, he got up and made breakfast for the two of them. As they ate, the gamekeeper looked at the clock and suggested that Connie hurry, for she had only 20 minutes before her sister was to arrive. As Connie got ready, the gamekeeper went outside with his dog to have a look around and make sure no one was about. When Connie finished dressing, they started on their way back toward the road. You'll still love me when I come back, won't you? She asked him. We will live together, right?
Yes, after you return.
And then they heard the sound of a car coming nearer. A horn beeped twice, and Connie's heart sank with the realization that the time had come for her to leave her lover. She no longer had any desire to see Venice.
Go on,
he said.
I'll stay here.
He then kissed her and pushed her gently toward the path that led to where her sister's car waited. Connie walked on through the trees, crying. After getting in the car, she turned around as it drove away to see if the gamekeeper was there. However, there was no sign of him. "It's good you're getting away from that man," Hilda said. Chapter 16. When the sisters arrived in Venice, a gondolier took them to their hotel. It was a beautiful, sunny day. On the way, he asked the ladies if they would like him to be their gondolier for the week. They thought about it and finally agreed. Connie gave him her card so that he would know whom to ask for at the hotel. The man who had invited the sisters was Sir Alexander from Scotland. He was a rich, married man who still liked to have his fun with other ladies. His wife accepted all of this as best as she could, but it was clear that she was happy his recent illness had taken a little of his health away from him. Now he had to spend more of his time at home. Most of the people staying in the hotel were pretty boring, and their father often spent his days painting somewhere among the islands. So the sisters went out most of the time, and at night they participated in the many parties that took place along the little Venetian canals. Connie thought it was all just too much. The dancing, the eating, the money, and the people. It was all like taking a drug. The sisters found that there were plenty of people in Venice that they knew. Michaelis was there, and he, of course, was eager to spend some time with Connie. She found that the time she liked best was when she and her sister would ride out to a far island and swim alone, away from all the enjoyment of the city. She would lie back in the water and enjoy the quiet and the feeling of being healthy and pregnant, for she now knew for certain that she was carrying the gamekeeper's baby inside of her. Then, one day, she received a letter from Clifford. In it, he reported that Mrs. Bolton had told him some interesting news. It seemed that the gamekeeper's wife had come back to him one day. After he would not let her in, she broke one of his windows and refused to leave. The gamekeeper then, himself, left and went to his mother's home in Tevershall. Clifford made it all seem like a funny joke, but Connie felt terrible for the gamekeeper. She decided to write to Mrs. Bolton in order to get more information. Mrs. Bolton very quickly wrote back to her, saying that once Bertha Coutts had heard about her husband's plan to divorce her, she came running to his home to refuse the divorce. She would not leave his house until he forced her to by shutting off the water. Now, however, she was running about the city, saying terrible things about the gamekeeper, saying that he had been sleeping with lots of different women, saying she found a gold-tipped cigarette and a bottle of perfume at his home. And she was telling people that he forced her to have sex with him when she went to his home, which, of course, could not have been true. Connie became angry with the gamekeeper for having married that woman. She also started to feel embarrassed about her relationship with him. People would soon find out that it was her that had been at his home. She even began to wish that she were no longer pregnant with his baby. An old friend of the sisters had arrived in Venice, named Duncan Forbes. He had gone to school with them and was now an artist. The three of them spent most of their days together now. Connie told him about her situation. As she spoke, she found herself feeling different about the gamekeeper suddenly. She was no longer angry with him. She now felt that he had done nothing at all wrong. He had only been guilty of giving her the greatest pleasure of her life. She decided to write a letter to Mrs. Bolton, along with a letter for her to give to the gamekeeper. It was dangerous, but she thought it too important. In the gamekeeper's letter, Connie wrote, "I was sorry to hear about your wife coming back. I hope that you are not too upset about everything. Try to take it as easy as you can. I'll be home in about 10 days. I hope everything will be okay." Then a second letter from Clifford arrived.
Everyone misses you here. Don't feel that you have to come back on the 16th if you are really enjoying yourself. There's no hurry. I'm fine. Mrs. Bolton is taking very good care of me. She is also keeping me well informed about the gamekeeper's situation, which seems to be getting worse. His wife, Bertha Coates, has now got most of the women in Tevershall believing her story. She has told the town all of his sexual secrets. The woman has really gone too far now. She has even started to name other women she believes are having sex with her husband. Several very respectable people have been named now. It's very disgusting. I had to talk with the gamekeeper myself the other day because I feared his wife running about in my woods. He was very rude to me, I must say. He told me that he could not do anything about his wife and that people should start fucking more so that they wouldn't have to talk so much about other people's fucking. When I asked him not to speak to me so rudely, he said, "Just because you haven't a working cock doesn't make it necessary for me to feel bad about the success of mine." After that, I simply gave him a week to collect his things and leave Ragby. He is going to train a new gamekeeper before he leaves. I must say that he isn't going to make many friends if he continues to go around speaking to people as he did to me. I would suggest that you stay abroad until August, just so you don't have to see any of this ugliness that is going on here.
Connie found Clifford's letter cold. She could not understand how he could treat Mellors so coldly. However, she then received a letter from Mellors himself, which explained things much more clearly.
Well, everyone knows now. My wife found a book of yours with your name written on the inside of the cover. She immediately went about town spreading word that it was you that I had been sleeping with all this time. Then your husband got involved and asked for her to be arrested for spreading such lies about respectable women. Since that time, Bertha has disappeared from Tevershall. After that, Clifford came to have a talk with me. We quarreled almost immediately. He said that I was a low person who walked around with his penis for anyone to enjoy, and I told him that he was just envious that I had a penis. Well, that was the end of it. I'm going to London this Saturday. I'm staying at my old landlady's place at 17 Coburg Square.
His letter did not mention her once. This upset her a great deal. She did not care so much that people knew her secret. She knew that that would go away with time. She was more concerned about the gamekeeper's attitude. She finished out her 10 days in Venice, spending a good amount of time with her sister and Duncan Forbes, who had now fallen in love with her. However, When he told Connie of his feelings, she simply said, "I just want men to leave me alone." So he did as he was told. Chapter 17. Connie decided to leave on Saturday with her father. She would take the Orient Express to Paris and arrive in London on Monday. She sent Mellors a letter explaining her plans and asked that they meet Monday at around 7 in the evening. On the train, her father noticed that she seemed a little sad. She was not even admiring the beautiful countryside through which they were passing.
"Pretty boring, the idea of returning to Rugby,"
he said. "I may never go back, actually," she quickly responded.
"Are you serious?"
he asked in great surprise.
"So suddenly?"
"I'm pregnant with another man's child."
"Whose?"
"You don't know him."
"What will you do?"
"I'm not sure. I suppose that I could just give the child to Clifford, but I'm not sure that I want to."
"Well, it's my opinion that one can never depend on one's love for others. You may love this man now, but what about a year or two from now? If I were you, I'd just bring up the baby at Rugby for the fun of it."
"But he's the only real man I've ever known, Father."
"Ah, well, a real man is very hard to find indeed."
He was happy to hear that his favorite daughter had found another man, for he had never liked Clifford. Once they arrived in London, he drove Connie to her hotel, and then went on his way to his club. Inside Connie's room, a letter waited for her from Mellors, asking that they meet at the Golden Cock at 7 o'clock. When she saw him that evening on Adams Street, he was wearing a suit. He looked very different from the gamekeeper she had once known. However, immediately, all of her worries and nervousness left her. His smile and loving greeting made her feel calm and safe. She knew then that she had made the right decision to be with him. They talked over dinner. "Was it terrible?" she asked him.
"Yes, I suppose it was. I was happy that you were far away from it all. Although I don't think that anyone believed any of the stories about us, not even your Clifford."
"I'm pregnant." Mellors did not say anything. He seemed a little sad. This upset Connie. She asked him if he was happy to hear the news, but he only said that he worried about the future, for it was so uncertain. "I could always give the child to Clifford. Is that what you want?" she asked him.
"What do you want to do?"
"I want to be with you."
"But what can I give you? I have no desire to make lots of money. I know my purpose in life, and I'm comfortable with it. But I don't think anyone else can understand it, including you."
"But what I love about your ability to be so physically caring, so gentle and manly at the same time. Everyone needs that, and yet so few people actually experience it."
"I suppose that I'm afraid of your money, and the people that come with it, really,"
he said, lowering his head like an embarrassed child. "You should believe in the love between us and not worry about all of those other things. They're all so unimportant. Come, let's go to your room and hold one another." In his room, they both undressed. He admired her naked, pregnant body and thought that maybe he should not touch her. She, however, grabbed hold of him and made him promise never to leave her.
"Okay, if that's what you want, then I'll never leave you,"
he said. "Now, kiss the child and tell it that you're happy it's coming," she insisted. He put his face between her legs and kissed the lips of her vagina. And at that moment he felt the deepest love for her that he had ever felt. He then entered her, and her earlier words about his gentle manliness seemed to make complete sense. He saw himself as the model of human tenderness, and she was his partner through it all. A great happiness came over him. When it was all over, and they lay silent next to each other, Connie asked him about his wife.
"Oh, that woman,"
he said angrily.
"I tried to love her long ago, but she wouldn't ever let me. I tell you there's no way to help her. Her life will never get any better. If it were allowed, I would have killed her a long time ago, just to end her pitiful life. I think that our divorce will happen in September. I'm afraid that you and I can't be together until then."
Connie did not know what to do. She would have the baby earlier than that, and she, too, needed to divorce Clifford. It was all so complicated. Why couldn't they just disappear to another part of the world? When she told her father, his first thought was that the gamekeeper was only with her for her money. He immediately became angry and embarrassed. "Oh, but he's really a man," she argued. "I'm sure you'd like him if you met him. Anyway, I'm planning to tell people that it's another man's child."
"Whose?"
"My friend, Duncan Forbes."
"And he won't mind?"
"No, I think he'll actually be honored by it." Then, even though both men did not like the idea, it was arranged for Sir Malcolm and Mellors to meet one another. They met at a restaurant, just the two of them. Most of the dinner was spent talking about India and Mellors' experience in the military. When the beer finally started to go to their heads, it was then that they began to talk a little more seriously, but not too seriously.
"Tell me, my boy, was she good in bed, my daughter?"
Sir Malcolm asked with a smile.
"Great,"
he answered.
"I feel it an honour to have such a woman carrying my child. Well, it's about time she found a real man who could fuck her like she was meant to be fucked. I like you. I'm sure that you've got a big penis between those thin legs of yours. Gamekeeper or not, if there's anything you ever need, you can just ask me, and I'll do what I can. But now, what are we to do about the present situation?"
However, they never did get around to answering that last question. They spent the rest of the time talking about women and fucking. Another meeting was then arranged. This one was between Mellors and Duncan Forbes. For the artist only agreed to have his name used if he could meet the gamekeeper. As for Mellors, he had to accept the plan, for it was really the cleanest way for he and Connie to divorce their spouses. So he, along with Connie and Hilda, went to the artist's apartment one evening for dinner. The two men did not get along from the beginning. Mellors, after being asked his opinion, expressed his dislike of the artist's work. He felt that it had no feeling in it at all. The artist immediately hated him and argued that he liked to avoid common feelings in his work. However, the gamekeeper told him the only feeling he found in his art was self-pity. Over dinner, the artist agreed to allow his name to be used if Connie would let him paint her picture. She agreed with no problem, but Mellors did not like the idea of letting this man have a look at her naked body. However, Connie managed to convince him that it was really a small favor to ask, and so it was agreed that Forbes would be named the father. Chapter 18. Dearest Clifford, I'm very sorry to have to write and tell you that I am in love with someone else. It is my wish that we divorce, so that I may then marry Duncan. I feel terrible to do this to you, but I just cannot return to Ragby. I'm sure that you can find another woman who would love you better than I have. I know that you never loved me as much as I needed you to. Please try to understand and divorce me so that we both can be happy again. When Clifford read this, he sat up in bed suddenly without saying a word. He had expected this to happen, but he never told anyone about it. His white face and absolute silence made Mrs. Bolton think he had become terribly ill all of a sudden. It was not until she ran to the phone to call a doctor that Clifford finally spoke.
She's not returning to me.
Who? Lady Chatterley? But that's impossible, Sir Clifford, Mrs. Bolton said. Actually, she very much believed it. She felt that he deserved to be left alone as well, for he let it all happen without a fight. He must have known the whole time that his wife loved another man, but he never once said anything to anyone about it. He just let it continue, pretending he knew nothing. Mrs. Bolton had seen this kind of thing before. She knew that the best thing to do was to help him cry, so she forced some tears out of her eyes, and almost immediately Sir Clifford's eyes began to water as well. She saw this and then went over to him and took him in her arms to comfort him. It was then that he started to cry uncontrollably like a baby. From this day on, he acted as a child with Mrs. Bolton. Their relationship became strangely close, with him touching and kissing her breasts as she washed him in the mornings, and her playfully kissing him back. It was quite shameful. However, at the same time, his abilities as a businessman somehow became even stronger, and he carried out his business with the greatest success. He wrote Connie a letter saying that he would like to see her one last time before agreeing to a divorce. Connie and Mellors both felt that he could not be trusted, but seeing that they had very little choice, Connie agreed to come to Ragby. Hilda went with her, even though Clifford had said she was not welcome. Being back in that large house made Connie very uncomfortable. She truly hated Ragby now, more than ever. When she sat with Clifford, he was very cold toward her. He asked her why it was that she had to leave him. "I love another man," she answered. But he did not believe that she could suddenly fall so much in love with Duncan Forbes to change her entire life for him. "I'm having his child," she then explained. Even this did not convince Clifford of her need to leave Ragby, and Connie, seeing that these lies were not working, decided to tell him the truth. "It's actually Oliver Mellors whom I love." He then exploded with anger.
That idiot! How could you want a child from him? Why would you want to marry him and take his dirty name? My God, you're crazy. You're hardly the woman I thought you were. No, I will not divorce you.
"But I could give you the child, and he could then keep your name at Ragby for many years to come," Connie pleaded. "We don't have to tell people about Mellors. We can use Duncan's name."
I'll never agree to a divorce.
So, Connie left Ragby for the last time. Hilda comforted her, saying that Clifford would surely calm down after a few days and agree to a divorce, for he did not benefit in any way from keeping the marriage. They then went back to Scotland together, while Mellors got a job working on a farm. They planned to live separately for 6 more months until his divorce was settled. After that, they would buy some land and have a farm of their own.
September 29th. The Grange Farm. I managed to get this job through an old army friend of mine. They've been giving me a lot of work to do, and I'm learning a lot. I think I enjoy farming quite a lot, actually. I guess it's because I deal more with animals than I do people. Even though Bertha didn't come to the divorce meeting, it seems everything will be finished up by March. I'm staying in a family's home now. They treat me well, and I get along with them. The miners in this town are the same as those in Tevershall. They're all terribly unhappy because the industry is doing badly and they've got no money. Sometimes I talk with the workers in town. I like them, but they're not going to do anything to change their situation. They've got no balls between their legs. They're all pretty much dead, and their sons and daughters are no better. Money and jazz are about all that they think about. I'm still pretty frightened about the future. All that I really want in life now is to live with you. Even so, I try not to think about you too much, because it upsets me. I know, however, that I'll be with you next year, and that keeps me going every day. I will patiently wait for that time to come and enjoy this time, even without sex. Once we're together again in the spring, we'll fuck again and make that flame between us burn brighter than ever before. Don't worry much about Clifford. He will let you go one of these days. If he doesn't, that's okay too. We can still be together. But in my heart, I believe he really will one day want you completely out of his life. So, I had better stop here. Until we can again be together, John Thomas wishes Lady Jane sweet dreams.